18. Meetup. The location for the 3body players' meetup was a small, out-of-the-way coffee shop. Wong had always imagined game meetups would be lively events full of people, but this meetup consisted of only 7 players, including himself. Like Wong, the other 6 did not look like gaming enthusiasts. Only 2 were relatively young. Another 3, including a woman, were middle-aged. There was also an old man who appeared to be in his 60s or 70s. Wong had originally thought that as soon as they met, they'd begin a lively discussion of 3body, but he was wrong. The profound but strange content of 3body had had a psychological impact on the participants. All the players, including Wong himself, couldn't bring it up easily. They only made simple self-introductions. The old man took out a refined pipe, filled it with tobacco, and smoked as he strolled around, admiring the paintings on the walls. The others sat silently, waiting for the meetup organizer to show up. They had all come early. Actually, of the 6, Wong already knew 2. The old man was a famous scholar who had made his name by imbuing Eastern philosophy with the content of modern science. The strangely dressed woman was a famous writer, one of those rare novelists who wrote in an avant-garde style but still had many readers. You could start one of her books on any page. Of the 2 middle-aged men, one was a vice president at China's largest software company, plainly and casually dressed so that his status wasn't obvious at all, and the other was a high-level executive at the State Power Corporation. Of the 2 young men, one was a reporter with a major media outlet, and the other was a doctoral student in the sciences. Wong now realized that a considerable number of 3body players were probably social elites like them. The meetup organizer showed up not long after. Wong's heart began to beat faster as soon as he saw the man. It was Pan Han, prime suspect for the murder of Shen Yufei. He took out his phone when no one was looking and texted Shuqiang. "Ha ha! Everyone got here early." Pan greeted them in a relaxed manner, as though nothing was wrong. Appearing in the media, he usually looked disheveled, like a vagrant, but today he was dressed sharply in a suit and dress shoes. "You're just like I imagined. 3body is intended for people in your class, because the common crowd cannot appreciate its meaning and mood. To play it well requires knowledge and understanding that ordinary people do not possess." Wong sent out his text.
"Spotted Pan Han at Yunhee Coffee Shop in Xichang District."
Pan continued. "Everyone here is an excellent 3body player. You have the best scores and are devoted to it. I believe that 3body is already an important part of your lives."
"It's part of what keeps me alive,"
the young doctoral student said.
"I saw it by accident on my grandson's computer,"
the old philosopher said, lifting his pipe stem.
"The young man abandoned it after a few tries, saying it was too abstruse. But I was attracted to it. I find it strange, terrible, but also beautiful. So much information is hidden beneath a simple representation."
A few players nodded at this description, including Wong himself. Wong received Da Shi's reply text.
"We also see him. No worries. Carry on. Play the fanatic in front of them, but not so much that you can't pull it off."
"Yes,"
the author agreed and nodded.
"I like the literary elements of 3body. The rises and falls of 203 civilizations evoke the qualities of epics in a new form."
She mentioned 203 civilizations, but Wong had only experienced 184. This told Wong that 3body progressed independently for each player, possibly with different worlds.
"I'm a bit sick of the real world," the young reporter said. 3body's already my second reality."
"Really?" Pan asked, interested.
"Me too,"
the software company vice president said.
Compared to 3-body, reality is so vulgar and unexciting."
"It's too bad that it's only a game," said the power company executive. "Very good," Pan said. Wong noticed his eyes sparkling with excitement. "I have a question that I think everyone wants to know the answer to," Wong said. "I know what it is, but you might as well ask." "Is 3-body only a game?" The other players nodded. Clearly the question was also on their minds. Pan stood up and said solemnly, "The world of 3-body, or Tri-Solaris, really does exist." "Where is it?" several players asked in unison. After looking at each of them in turn, Pan sat down and spoke. "Some questions I can answer, others I cannot. But if you are meant to be with Tri-Solaris, all your questions will be answered someday." "Then, does the game really portray Tri-Solaris accurately?" the reporter asked. "First, the ability of Tri-Solarans to dehydrate through its many cycles of civilization is real. In order to adapt to the unpredictable natural environment and avoid extreme environmental conditions unsuitable for life, they can completely expel the water in their bodies and turn into dry, fibrous objects." "What do Tri-Solarans look like?" Pan shook his head. "I don't know. I really don't. In every cycle of civilization, the appearance of Tri-Solarans is different. However, the game does portray something else that really existed on Tri-Solaris, the Tri-Solaran formation computer."
"Huh. I thought that was the most unrealistic aspect,"
the software company vice president said.
"I conducted a test with more than 100 employees at my company. Even if the idea worked, a computer made of people would probably operate at a speed slower than manual computation."
Pan gave a mysterious smile. "You're right. But suppose that of the 30 million soldiers forming the computer, each one is capable of raising and lowering the black and white flags 100,000 times per second. And suppose also that the light cavalry soldiers on the main bus can run at several times the speed of sound, or even faster. Then the result would be very different. You asked about the appearance of the Tri-Solarans just now. According to some signs, the bodies of the Tri-Solarans who formed the computer were covered by a purely reflective surface, which probably evolved as a response to survival under extreme conditions of sunlight. The mirror-like surface could be deformed into any shape, and they communicated with each other by focusing light with their bodies. This kind of light speech could transmit information extremely rapidly, and was the foundation of the Tri-Solaran formation computer. Of course, this was still a very inefficient machine, but it was capable of completing calculations that were too difficult to be performed manually. The computer did, in fact, make its first appearance in Tri-Solaris as formations of people, before becoming mechanical, and then electronic. Pan stood up and paced behind the players. As a game, 3-body only borrows the background of human society to simulate the development of Tri-Solaris. This is done to give players a familiar environment. The real Tri-Solaris is very different from the world of the game, but the existence of the 3 suns is real. They're the foundation of the Tri-Solaran environment.
"Developing this game must have cost an enormous amount of effort," the vice president said. "But the goal is clearly not profit."
The goal of 3-body is very simple and pure. To gather those of us who have common ideals, Pan said.
"What ideals do we have in common, exactly?"
Wong immediately regretted the question. He wondered whether asking it sounded hostile. Pan studied everyone meaningfully, and then added in a soft voice, "How would you feel
if Trisolaran civilization were to enter our world.
I would be happy.
The young reporter was the first to break the silence.
I've lost hope in the human race after what I've seen in recent years. Human society is incapable of self-improvement, and we need the intervention of an outside force.
I agree,
the author shouted. She was very excited, as though finally finding an outlet for pent-up feelings.
The human race is hideous.
I spent the first half of my life unveiling this ugliness with the scalpel of literature, but now I'm even sick of the work of dissection. I yearn for Trisolaran civilization to bring real beauty to this world.
Pond said nothing. That glint of excitement appeared in his eyes again. The old philosopher waved his pipe, which had gone out. He spoke with a serious mien.
Let's discuss this question with a bit more depth. What is your impression of the Aztecs?
Dark and bloody,
the author said.
Blood-drenched pyramids lit by insidious fires seen through dark forests. Those are my impressions.
The philosopher nodded.
Very good. Then try to imagine if the Spanish conquistadors did not intervene, what would have been the influence of that civilization on human history?
You're calling black white and white black,
the software company vice president said.
The conquistadors who invaded the Americas were nothing more than murderers and robbers.
Even so, at least they prevented the Aztecs from developing without bound, turning the Americas into a bloody, dark, great empire. Then civilization as we know it wouldn't have appeared in the Americas, and democracy wouldn't have thrived until much later. Indeed, maybe they wouldn't have appeared at all. This is the key to the question. No matter what the Trisolarans are like, their arrival will be good news for the terminally ill human race.
But have you thought through the fact that the Aztecs were completely destroyed by the Western invaders?
The power company executive asked. He looked around, as though seeing these people for the first time.
Your thoughts are very dangerous. You mean profound,
the doctoral student said, raising a finger. He nodded vigorously at the philosopher.
I had the same thought, but I didn't know how to express it. You said it so well.
After a moment of silence, Pond turned to Wong.
The other 6 have all given their views. What about you?
I stand with them,
Wong said, pointing to the reporter and the philosopher. He kept his answer simple. The less said, the better.
Very good,
Pond said. He turned to the software company vice president and the power company executive.
The 2 of you are no longer welcome at this meetup, and you are no longer appropriate players for 3body. Your IDs will be deleted. Please, leave now. Thank you.
The 2 stood up and looked at each other, then glanced around, confused, and left. Pond held out his hand to the remaining 5, shaking each person's hand in turn. Then he said solemnly, "We are comrades now." 19. 3body, Einstein, the Pendulum Monument, and the Great Rip. The 5th time Wang Miao logged on to 3body, it was dawn, as usual, but the world was unrecognizable. The Great Pyramid that had appeared the first 4 times had been destroyed by the trisolar syzygy. In its place was a tall, modern building, whose dark gray shape was familiar to Wang. The United Nations headquarters. In the distance were many more tall buildings, apparently dehydrotories. All had completely reflective mirror surfaces. In the dawn light they appeared as giant crystal plants growing out of the ground. Wang heard a violin playing something by Mozart. The playing wasn't very practiced, but there was a special charm to it, as though saying, "I play for myself." The violinist was a homeless old man sitting on the steps in front of the UN headquarters, his fluffy silver hair fluttering in the wind. Next to his feet was an old top hat containing some scattered change. Wang suddenly noticed the sun, but it rose in the opposite direction from the dawn light, and the patch of the sky around it was still completely dark. The sun was very large, its half-risen disk taking up a third of the horizon. Wang's heart beat faster. Such a large sun could only mean another great catastrophe. But when Wang turned around, the old man continued to play as though nothing odd was happening. His silver hair shone brilliantly in the sun, as though it was on fire. The sun was silvery, just like the old man's hair. It cast a pale white light over the ground, but Wang couldn't feel any warmth from the light. He gazed at the sun, which had now completely risen. On the giant silver disk, he could pick out lines like wood grains, mountain ranges. Wang realized that the disk did not emit light. It only reflected the light from the real sun, which was on the other side of the sky, below the horizon. What had risen wasn't a sun at all, but a giant moon. The giant moon moved briskly up the sky at a pace that could be detected by the naked eye. In the process, it gradually waned from a full to a half moon, and then a crescent. The old man's soothing violin strains drifted on the cold morning breeze. The majestic sight of the universe was like the music made material. Wang was intoxicated. The giant crescent now fell into the dawn light and grew much brighter. When only two glowing tips remained above the horizon, Wang imagined them as the tips of the horns of a titanic bull rushing toward the sun.
"Honored Copernicus, rest your busy feet here a while,"
the old man said after the giant moon had set.
"Then, after you've appreciated some Mozart, perhaps I can have some lunch." "If I'm not mistaken—"
Wang looked at the face full of wrinkles. The wrinkles were long and their curves gentle, as though they were trying to create a kind of harmony.
"You're not. I'm Einstein, a pitiful man full of faith in God, though abandoned by him." "What is that giant moon? I've never seen it the previous times I was here." "It's already cooled off." "What?"
"The big moon.
When I was little, it was still hot. When it rose to the middle of the sky, I could see the red glow from the central plains. But now it's cold." "Haven't you heard about the Great Rip?" "No, what's that?"
Einstein sighed and shook his head.
"Let's not speak of it. Forget the past. My past, civilization's past, the universe's past. All of it too painful to recall." "How did you get to be like this?"
Wang searched in his pocket and found some change. He bent over and dropped the money into the hat.
"Thank you, Mr. Copernicus. Let's hope that God doesn't abandon you, though I don't have much faith in that. I feel that the model you and Newton and the others created in the East, with the help of the human formation computer, was very close to being correct. But the little bit of error left was like an uncrossable chasm for Newton and the others. I've always believed that without me, others would have discovered special relativity, eventually. But general relativity is different. The bit that Newton lacked was the effect on planetary orbit from the gravitationally induced curvature of space-time, described by general relativity. Though the error caused by it was small, its impact on the results of the computation was fatal. Adding the correction factor for perturbation from space-time curvature to the classical equations would yield the right mathematical model. The amount of computational power required far exceeds what you accomplished in the East, but is easily provided by modern computers. Have the results of the computation been confirmed by astronomical observations? If that had occurred, do you think I'd be here? But from the perspective of aesthetics, I must be right and the universe must be wrong. God abandoned me. Then others abandoned me as well. I wanted nowhere. Princeton dismissed me as a professor. UNESCO wouldn't even have me as a science consultant. Before, even if they had begged on their knees, I wouldn't have wanted the position. I even thought of going to Israel to be president, but they changed their minds and said I was nothing but a fraud.
Einstein began playing again, picking up right where he had stopped. After listening to him for a while, Wong strode toward the UN building.
"There's no one in there," Einstein said, still playing. "All the members of the General Assembly session are behind the building, attending the pendulum initiation ceremony."
Wong walked around the building and was greeted by a breathtaking sight. A colossal pendulum that seemed to stretch between the sky and the earth. In fact, Wong had seen it peeking out from behind the building, but he didn't know what he was seeing. The pendulum resembled those constructed by Fu Si to hypnotize the sun god during the Warring States period, back when Wang Miao first logged on to 3body. But the pendulum before him had been completely modernized. The two pillars holding up the pendulum were made of metal, each as tall as the Eiffel Tower. The weight was also made of metal, streamlined with a smooth, mirror-like, electroplated surface. The pendulum line, made of some ultra-strong material, was so thin as to be almost invisible, and the weight seemed to float in the air between the two towers. Below the pendulum was a crowd of people dressed in suits, probably the leaders of the various countries attending the General Assembly session. They gathered in small cliques and talked amongst themselves quietly, as though waiting for something.
"Ah, Copernicus, the man who crossed 5 eras," someone shouted. The others welcomed him.
"You're one of those who saw the pendulums of the Warring States period with your own eyes."
A friendly man shook and held Wong's hand. Someone introduced the man as the Secretary General of the UN from Africa.
"Yes, I did see them," Wong said. "But why are we building another one now?"
"It's a monument for Trisolaris, as well as a tombstone."
The Secretary General looked up at the pendulum. From down here, it appeared as big as a submarine.
"A tombstone? For who?"
"For an aspiration, a striving that lasted through almost 200 civilizations. The effort to solve the 3-body problem, to find the pattern in the sun's movements."
"Is the effort over?"
"Yes. As of now, it's completely over."
Wong hesitated for a moment before taking out a stack of papers. Wei Cheng's 3-body mathematical model.
I came here for this. I brought a mathematical model that solves the 3-body problem. I have reason to believe it will likely work."
As soon as Wong said this, the crowd around him lost interest. They returned to their cliques to continue their conversations. He noticed that a few even shook their heads and laughed as they left him. The Secretary General took the document, and without even glancing at it, handed it to a slender man wearing glasses standing next to him.
"Out of respect for your famed reputation, I'll have my science advisor take a look. Indeed, everyone here has shown you respect. If anyone else had said what you said, they'd be laughing at him."
The science advisor flipped through the document.
"Evolutionary algorithm. Copernicus, you're a genius. Anyone who can come up with such an algorithm is a genius. This requires not only superior math skills, but also imagination." "You seem to be suggesting that someone has already created such a mathematical model." "Yes, there are dozens of other mathematical models. Of those, more than half are more advanced than yours. They've all been implemented and run on computers. During the past 2 centuries, such massive computation became the principal activity of this world. Everyone waited for the results, as if waiting for Judgment Day." "And? We have definitively proven that the 3-body problem has no solution."
Wong gazed up at the massive pendulum overhead. In the dawn light, it was crystal bright. Its deformed, mirror-like surface reflected everything around it like the eye of the world. In this place, in a distant age, separated from the here and now by many civilizations, he and King Wen had passed through a forest of giant pendulums on their way to the palace of King Zhou. Just like that, history had made a long circuit and returned to its starting place. The science advisor said,
"It's just like we guessed long ago. The three-body system is a chaotic system. Tiny perturbations can be endlessly amplified. Its patterns of movement essentially cannot be mathematically predicted."
Wang felt his scientific knowledge and system of thought become a blur in a single moment. In their place was unprecedented confusion.
If an extremely simple arrangement like the three-body system is unpredictable chaos, how can we have any faith in discovering the laws of the complicated universe?
God is a shameless old gambler. He has abandoned us. The speaker was Einstein, waving his violin. Wang didn't know when he had shown up. The Secretary General slowly nodded.
Yes, God is a gambler. The only hope for Trisolaran civilization is to gamble as well.
By now, the giant moon was rising again from the dark side of the horizon. Its large, silvery image was reflected by the surface of the pendulum weight. The light wriggled strangely, as though the weight and the moon had developed a mysterious sympathy together.
This civilization seems to have developed to a very advanced state,
Wang said.
Yes, we've mastered the energy of the atom and reached the information age.
The Secretary General didn't seem to be too impressed by his own words.
Then there is hope. Even if it's impossible to know the pattern of the sun's movements, civilization can continue to develop until it reaches a stage where it can survive the chaotic eras by protecting itself against the devastating catastrophes of those eras.
People once thought as you do. That was one of the motivating forces pushing Trisolaran civilization to tenaciously come back again and again. But the moon made us realize the naivete of such an idea.
The Secretary General pointed to the rising giant moon.
This is probably the first time you've seen this moon. Actually, since it's about a quarter of the size of our planet, it's no longer a moon, but a companion to our world in a double-planet system. It resulted from the Great Rip.
The Great Rip?
The disaster that destroyed the last civilization. Compared to the civilizations before it, they had ample warning of the disaster. Based on surviving records, the astronomers of Civilization 191 detected a frozen flying star early on.
Wang's heart clenched as he heard the last phrase. A frozen flying star was a terrible omen for Trisolaris. When a flying star, or a distant sun, seems to come to a complete stop against the background star field, then the sun's and the planet's motion vectors are aligned. This has three possible interpretations. The sun and the planet are moving in the same direction at the same speed. The sun and the planet are moving apart from each other, and the sun and the planet are moving toward each other. Before Civilization 191, this last possibility was purely theoretical, a disaster that had never occurred. But the population's fear of it and their vigilance did not diminish, so much so that frozen flying star became an extremely unlucky phrase in many Trisolaran civilizations. A single flying star remaining still was sufficient to terrify everyone.
And then 3 flying stars froze simultaneously. The people of Civilization 191 stood on the ground, gazing up helplessly at the 3 frozen flying stars, at the 3 suns falling directly toward their world. A few days later, one of the suns moved to a distance where its outer gaseous layer became visible. In the middle of a tranquil night, the star suddenly turned into a blazing sun. Separated by intervals of 30 hours or so, the other 2 suns also appeared in quick succession. This was not a normal kind of trisolar day. By the time the last flying star turned into a sun, the first sun had already swept past the planet at extremely close range. Right after that, the other two suns swept past Trisolaris at even closer ranges, well within the planet's Roche limit, such that the tidal forces imposed on Trisolaris by the three suns exceeded the force of the planet's gravitational self-attraction. The first sun shook the deepest geological structure of the planet. The second sun tore open a great rift in the planet that went straight to the core, and the third sun ripped the planet into two pieces.
The Secretary General pointed at the giant moon overhead.
That's the smaller piece. There are still ruins from Civilization 191 on it, but it's a lifeless world. It was the most terrible disaster in the entire history of Trisolaris. After the planet was torn apart, the two irregularly shaped pieces each returned to spherical form under self-gravitation. The dense, searing planetary core material gushed to the surface, and the oceans boiled over the lava. The continents drifted over the magma like icebergs. As they collided, the ground became as soft as the ocean. Massive mountain ranges, tens of thousands of meters high, rose in an hour and disappeared just as quickly. For a while, the two ripped-apart pieces were still connected by streams of molten lava that coalesced into a space-spanning river. Then the lava cooled and turned into rings around the planets. But because of perturbations from the planets, the rings were unstable. The rocks that formed them fell back to the surface in a rain of giant stones that lasted several centuries. Can you imagine what kind of hell that was? The ecological destruction caused by this catastrophe was the most severe in all of history. All life on the companion planet went extinct, and the mother planet almost became a lifeless waste as well. But in the end, the seeds of life managed to germinate here, and as the geology of the mother planet settled down, evolution began its tottering steps in new oceans and on new continents, until civilization reappeared for the 192nd time. The entire process took 90 million years. Trisolaris' place in the universe is even more grim than we had imagined. What will happen the next time frozen flying stars occur? Very likely, our planet will not just skim past the edge of the sun, but will plunge into the fiery sea of the sun itself. Given enough time, this possibility will become certainty. This was originally just a frightening speculation, but a recent astronomical discovery has caused us to lose all hope for the fate of Trisolaris. The researchers had intended to recover the history of the formation of the stars and the planets based on signs in this stellar system. Instead, they discovered that in the distant past, the Trisolaran stellar system had 12 planets, yet now only this one remains. There is only one explanation. The other 11 planets have all been consumed by the three suns. Our world is nothing more than the sole survivor of a great hunt. The fact that civilization has been reincarnated 192 times is only a kind of luck. Also, after further study, we discovered the phenomenon of breathing by the three stars. The stars breathe? It's only a metaphor. You discover the gaseous outer layer of the suns, but you didn't know that this gaseous layer expands and contracts over cycles lasting eons, like breathing. When the gaseous layer expands, its thickness can grow by more than a dozen times. This greatly increases the diameter of the sun, like a giant mitt that can catch planets more easily. When a planet passes by a sun at close range, it will enter the sun's gaseous layer. Friction will cause it to lose speed, and finally, like a meteor, it will fall into the blazing sea of the sun, dragging a long, fiery tail. The study results show that in the long history of the Trisolaran stellar system, every time the sun's gaseous layers expanded, 1 or 2 planets were consumed. The other 11 planets all fell into a fiery sea during times when the gaseous layers were at their greatest. Right now, the gaseous layers of the three suns are in a contracted stage. Otherwise, our planet would have already fallen into one of them the last time they skimmed past. But scholars predict that the next expansion will occur in 1,000 years.
We can't stay in this terrible place anymore, Einstein said, crouched down on the ground like an old beggar. The Secretary General nodded.
We can't stay here any longer. The only path left for Trisolaran civilization is to gamble with the universe.
How? Wong asked.
We must leave the Trisolaran stellar system and fly into the wide open sea of stars. We must find in the galaxy a new world to emigrate to.
Wong heard a grinding noise. He saw that the giant weight of the pendulum was being pulled up by a thin cable whose other end was attached to an elevated winch. As it rose to its highest point, a great waning crescent moon descended slowly in the sky behind it. The Secretary General solemnly announced,
"Start the pendulum."
The elevated winch released the cable tied to the pendulum, and the weight noiselessly fell along a smooth arc. Initially it fell slowly, but then it accelerated, reaching maximum speed at the bottom of the arc. As it sliced through the air, the sound of the wind was deep and resonant. By the time the noise disappeared, the pendulum had followed the arc to its highest point on the other side, and after pausing for a moment, began its backward swing. Wong felt the great force generated by the movement of the pendulum, as though the ground was shaken by its swings. Unlike a pendulum in the real world, this giant pendulum's period was not stable, but changed constantly. This was due to the continually shifting gravitational attraction of the giant moon. When the giant moon was on this side of the planet, its gravity partially canceled out the gravity of the planet, causing the pendulum to lose weight. When it was on the other side of the planet, its gravity was added to the gravity of the planet, causing the pendulum's weight to increase, almost to the level it would have had before the Great Rip. As he gazed up at the awe-inspiring swings of the Trisolaran pendulum monument, Wong asked himself,
Does it represent the yearning for order or the surrender to chaos?
Wong also thought of the pendulum as a gigantic metal fist, swinging eternally against the unfeeling universe, noiselessly shouting out Trisolaran civilization's indomitable battle cry. As Wong Miao's eyes blurred with tears, he saw a line of text appear against the background of the swinging pendulum. 451 years later, Civilization 192 was destroyed by the fiery flames of twin suns appearing together. It had reached the atomic age and the information age. Civilization 192 was a milestone in Trisolaran civilization. It finally proved that the 3-body problem had no solution. It gave up the useless effort that had already lasted through 191 cycles and set the course for future civilizations. Thus, the goal of 3-body has changed. The new goal is head for the stars, find a new home. We invite you to log on again. After logging out of 3-body, Wong felt exhausted, the same way he did after each previous session. But this time, he only rested half an hour before logging in again. This time, against the pitch-black background, an unexpected line of text appeared. The situation is urgent. The 3-body servers are about to be shut down. Please log on freely during the remaining time. 3-body will now go directly to the final scene. 20. 3-body Expedition. The chilly dawn revealed a bare landscape. There was no pyramid, no United Nations headquarters, no sign of the pendulum monument. Only a dark desert extended to the horizon, just as Wong had seen the first time he had logged in. But Wong soon realized that he was wrong. What he thought were numerous stones arrayed across the desert were not stones at all, but human heads. The ground was filled with a densely packed crowd. From where he stood on a small hill, Wong could see no end to the sea of people. He estimated the number of individuals within his view alone to be in the hundreds of millions. All the Trisolarans on the planet were probably gathered here. The silence of hundreds of millions created a suffocating sense of strangeness.
What are they waiting for?
Wong looked around and noticed everyone was gazing up at the sky. Wong lifted his face and found the starry sky had been transformed to an astonishing sight. The stars were arrayed in a square formation. However, Wong soon realized that the stars in the formation were in a synchronous orbit above the planet, moving together against the dimmer, more distant background of the Milky Way. The stars in the formation closest to the direction of dawn were also the brightest, shining with a silver light that cast shadows on the ground. The brightness decreased as one moved away from that edge. Wong counted more than 30 stars along each edge of the formation, which meant a total of more than 1,000 stars. The slow movement of the obviously artificial formation against the starry universe exuded a solemn power. A man standing next to him nudged him lightly and spoke in a low voice.
"Ah, Great Copernicus, why have you come so late? 3 cycles of civilization have passed, and you've missed many great enterprises."
What is that?
Wong asked, pointing at the formation in the sky.
"The Trisolaran Interstellar Fleet. It's about to begin its expedition."
Trisolaran civilization has already achieved the capacity for interstellar flight?
Yes. All those magnificent ships can reach 1/10 the speed of light.
That is a great accomplishment, as far as I understand it, but it still seems too slow for interstellar flight.
The journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step. The key is finding the right target.
What's the fleet's destination?
A star with planets about 4 light-years away, the closest star to the Trisolaran system.
Wong was surprised.
The closest star to us is also about 4 light-years away.
You?
The Earth.
Oh, that's not very surprising. In most regions of the Milky Way, the distribution of stars is fairly even. It's the result of star clusters acting under the influence of gravity. The distance between most stars is between 3 and 6 light-years.
A loud, joyous cry erupted from the crowd. Wong looked up and saw that every star in the square formation was rapidly growing brighter. This was due to the light emitted by the ships themselves. Their combined illumination soon overwhelmed the dawn, and 1,000 stars became 1,000 little suns. Trisolaris was bathed in glorious daylight, and the crowd raised their hands and formed an endless prairie of uplifted arms. The Trisolaran fleet began to accelerate, solemnly gliding across the dome of the sky, skimming past the giant just-risen moon's tip, casting a dim blue glow against the moon's mountains and plains. The joyous cry subsided. The people of Trisolaris mutely gazed as their hope gradually shrunk in the western sky. They would not know the outcome of the launch in their lifetimes, but 400 or 500 years from now, their descendants would receive the news from a new world, the beginning of a new life for Trisolaran civilization. Wong stood with them, silently gazing, until the phalanx of 1,000 stars shrank into a single star, and until that star disappeared in the western night sky. Then the following text appeared. The Trisolaran expedition to the New World has begun. The fleet is still in flight. 3-body is over. When you have returned to the real world, if you remain true to the promise you've made, please attend the meetup of the Earth Trisolaris Organization. The address will be in the follow-up email you receive. Part 3. Sunset for Humanity. 21. Rebels of Earth. There were many more attendees this time than at the last three-body meetup. They met at the employee cafeteria of a chemical plant. The factory had already been moved elsewhere, and the interior of the building, which was about to be demolished, was worn out but spacious. About 300 people were gathered here, and Wang Miao noticed many familiar faces, celebrities and elites of various fields, famous scientists, writers, politicians, and so on. The first thing to attract Wang's attention was the strange device at the center of the cafeteria. 3 silver spheres, each slightly smaller than a bowling ball, hovered and swirled over a metal base. Wang guessed the device was probably based on magnetic levitation. The orbits of the 3 spheres were completely random, a real-life version of the 3-body problem. The others didn't pay much attention to the artistic portrayal of the 3-body problem. Instead, they focused on Pan Han, who was standing on top of a broken table in the middle of the cafeteria.
"Did you murder Comrade Shen Yufei?" a man asked.
"Yes," Pan said, perfectly calm. "It's because the Adventists have traitors like her in our midst that the organization faces the crisis it does today."
"Who gave you the right to kill?"
"I did it out of a sense of duty to the organization."
"Duty? I think you've always had malice in your heart."
"What do you mean by that?"
"What has the Environment Branch done under your leadership? Your charge is to exploit and create environmental problems to make the population loathe science and modern industry. But in reality, you've only used our Lord's technology and predictions to gain riches and fame for yourself."
"Do you think I became famous for myself? To my eyes, the entire human race is a pile of garbage. Why would I care what they think? But if I'm not famous, how do I direct and channel their thinking?"
"You always pick the easy tasks. What you've done could have been better accomplished by regular environmentalists. They're more sincere and passionate than you, and with just a little guidance, we could easily take advantage of their actions. Your Environment Branch should be creating environmental disasters and then exploiting them. For example, disseminating poison in reservoirs, leaking toxic waste from chemical plants. Have you done any of those? No, not a single one."
"We had devised numerous programs and plans, but the commander vetoed them all. Anyway, such acts would have been stupid, at least until recently. The Biology and Medicine Branch once created a catastrophe from the overuse of antibiotics, but that was soon detected, and the rash actions of the European detachment almost drew attention to us."
"Talk about drawing attention to us. You just murdered someone."
"Listen to me, comrades. Sooner or later it would have been unavoidable. You must already know that the governments of the world are preparing for war. In Europe and North America, they're already cracking down on the organization. Once the crackdown begins here, the redemptionists will no doubt side with the government. So our first priority is to purge the redemptionists from the organization."
"That is not within your authority."
"Of course the commander must decide. But, comrades, I can tell you right now that the commander is an Adventist."
"Now you're just making things up. Everyone knows the scope of the commander's power. If the commander really is an Adventist, then the redemptionists would have been purged long ago."
"Maybe the commander knows something we don't. Perhaps that's what the meeting today is about."
After this, the crowd's attention turned away from Pan Han to the crisis before them. A famous scientist who had won the Turing Award jumped onto the table and began to speak.
"The time for talk is over. Comrades, what should be our next step?"
"Start a global rebellion!"
"Then we're asking to be killed!"
Long live the spirit of Trisolaris! We shall persevere like the stubborn grass that resprouts after every wildfire.
A rebellion will finally reveal our existence to the world. As long as we have an appropriate plan of action, I'm sure many people will support us." This last remark came from Pan Han, and many applauded. Someone yelled, "The commander is here!" The crowd parted to form a path. Wang looked up and felt dizzy. The world turned white and black in his eyes, and the only spot of color was the person who had just appeared. Surrounded by a group of young bodyguards, the commander-in-chief of the Earth Trisolaris rebels, Ya Winxia, walked steadily into the crowd. Ya stood in the middle of the space the crowd cleared for her, raised a bony fist, and, with a resolve and strength that Wang could not believe she possessed, said, "Eliminate human tyranny!" The crowd responded in a way that had clearly been rehearsed countless times. "The world belongs to Trisolaris." "Hello, comrades," Ya said. Her voice returned to the gentleness that Wang knew. It was only now that he could be sure that it was really her. "I haven't been well lately, and haven't spent much time with all of you. But now the situation is urgent, and I know everyone is under a great deal of pressure. So I've come to see you."
"Commander, take care of yourself,"
someone in the crowd said. Wang could hear the heartfelt concern. Ya said,
"Before we move on to more important matters, let's take care of one small detail.
Pan Han." She kept her eyes on the crowd even as she called his name. "Here, Commander." Pan emerged from the crowd. Earlier he had tried to lose himself in the throng. He appeared calm, but the terror in his heart was obvious. The commander had not called him comrade, a bad sign.
"You committed a severe violation of the organization's rules."
Ya spoke without looking at Pan. Her voice remained kind, as though talking to a child who had been naughty. "Commander, the organization is facing a crisis of survival. If we don't take decisive measures and cleanse the traitors and enemies within, we will lose everything." Ya looked up at Pan, her eyes affectionate, but his breath stopped for a few seconds.
"The ultimate goal and ideal of the ETO is to lose everything. Everything that now belongs to the human race, including us."
"Then you must be an Adventist. Commander, please openly declare this to be true, because it's very important. Am I right, comrades? Very important!" He shouted and waved an arm as he looked around, but the crowd remained mute.
"This request is not yours to make. You have seriously violated our code of conduct. If you want to make an appeal, now is the time. Otherwise, you must bear the responsibility."
Ya spoke slowly, enunciating every word, as though afraid the child she was teaching had trouble understanding. "I went intending to eliminate Wei Cheng, that math prodigy. The decision was made by Comrade Evans and ratified by the committee unanimously. If he really succeeds in creating a mathematical model of the three-body problem that gives a complete solution, our Lord will not come, and the great enterprise of Trisolaris on Earth will be ruined. I only shot at Shen Yufei since she shot at me first. I was acting in self-defense."
Ya nodded. "Let us believe you. This is, after all, not the most important issue. I hope we can continue to trust you. Now, please repeat the request you made to me just now."
Pan was stunned for a second.
That she had moved on didn't seem to relax him.
I ask that you openly declare yourself to be an Adventist. After all, the action plan of the Adventists is also your ideal.
Then repeat the plan of action.
A human society can no longer rely on its own power to solve its problems. It can also no longer rely on its own power to restrain its madness. Therefore, we ask our Lord to come to this world and with its power forcefully watch over us and transform us so as to create a brand new, perfect human civilization.
Are the Adventists loyal believers in this plan?
Of course! Commander, please do not believe false rumors.
It's not a false rumor,
a man shouted. He made his way to the front.
I'm Raphael from Israel. 3 years ago, my 14-year-old son died in an accident. I had his kidney donated to a Palestinian girl suffering kidney failure as an expression of my hope that the two peoples could live together in peace. For this ideal, I was willing to give my life. Many Israelis and Palestinians sincerely strove toward the same goal by my side. But all this was useless. Our home remained trapped in the quagmire of cycles of vengeance.
Eventually, I lost hope in the human race and joined the ETO. Desperation turned me from a pacifist into an extremist. Also, probably because I donated so much money to the organization, I became a core member of the Adventists. Let me tell you now, the Adventists have their own secret agenda. And it is this. The human race is an evil species. Human civilization has committed unforgivable crimes against the earth and must be punished. The ultimate goal of the Adventists is to ask our Lord to carry out this divine punishment, the destruction of all humankind.
The real program of the Adventists is already an open secret,
someone shouted.
But what you don't know is that this was not a program they evolved into. It was the goal set out at the very beginning. It's been the lifelong dream of Mike Evans, the mastermind behind the Adventists. He lied to the organization and fooled everyone, including the commander. Evans has been working toward this goal from the very start. He turned the Adventists into a kingdom of terror, populated by extreme environmentalists and madmen who hated the human race.
I didn't know Evans's real thoughts until much later,
Yah said.
Still, I tried to patch over the differences to allow the ETO to remain whole, but some of the other acts committed by Adventists lately have made the effort impossible.
Pond said, Commander, the Adventists are the core of ETO. Without us, there is no Earth Trisolaris movement.
But this is no excuse for you to monopolize all communications between our Lord and the organization.
We built the second Red Coast base. Of course we should operate it.
The Adventists took advantage of this and committed an unforgivable betrayal of the organization. You intercepted the messages from our Lord to the organization and passed on only a small portion of them. Even those you distorted. Also, through the second Red Coast base, you sent a large amount of information to our Lord without the organization's approval.
Silence descended over the meeting like a monstrous thing. Wong's scalp began to tingle. Pond did not answer. His expression became cold, as if to say, finally, it has happened.
There is much evidence of the Adventists' betrayal. Comrade Shen Yufei was one of the witnesses. Though she belonged to the core group of Adventists, in her heart she remained a resolute redemptionist. You only discovered this recently, and she already knew too much. When Evan sent you, He wanted you to kill 2 people, not 1.
Pan looked around, apparently reassessing the situation. His gesture didn't go unnoticed by Ye.
You can see that most people attending this meeting are comrades from the Redemptionist faction. I trust that the few Adventists who are here will stand on the side of the organization. But men like Evans and you can no longer be saved. To protect the program and ideals of the ETO, we must completely solve the problem of the Adventists.
Silence returned. A few moments later, one of the bodyguards near Ye, a young woman, smiled. She walked toward Pan Han casually. Pan's face changed. He stuck a hand inside the lapel of his jacket, but the young woman dashed quicker than the eye could follow. Before anyone could react, she wrapped one of her slender arms around Pan's neck, placed her other hand on top of his head, and by applying her unexpected strength at just the right angle, she twisted Pan's head 180 degrees with practiced ease. The cracks from his cervical vertebrae breaking stood out against the complete silence. The young woman's hands immediately let go, as though Pan's head was too hot. Pan fell to the ground, and the gun that had killed Shen Yufei slid under the table. His body still spasmed, and his eyes remained open, his tongue sticking out. But his head no longer moved, as though it were never a part of the rest of his body. Several men came and dragged him away, the blood oozing from his mouth, leaving a long trail.
Ah, Xiao Wang, you're here too. How have you been?
Ye's gaze fell on Wang Miao. She smiled kindly at him and nodded. Then she turned to the others.
This is Professor Wang, a member of the Chinese Academy of Sciences, and my friend. He researches nanomaterials. This is the first technology our Lord wishes to extinguish from the earth.
No one looked at Wang, and Wang had no strength to express himself in any way. He had to pull at the sleeve of the man next to him so that he wouldn't fall, but the man lightly brushed his hand away.
Xiao Wang, why don't I continue to tell you the story of Red Coast from the last time? All the comrades here can listen to. This is not a waste of time. In this extraordinary moment, it is a fine time to review the history of our organization. Red Coast? You weren't done?
Wang asked foolishly. Ye slowly approached the 3-body model, seemingly absorbed by the swirling silver spheres. Through the broken window, the setting sun's light fell on the model, and the flying spheres intermittently reflected the light onto the rebel commander, like sparks from a bonfire.
No, I've only just started,
Ye said softly. 22. Red Coast 5. Since she had entered Red Coast Base, Yao Winxia had never thought of leaving. After she learned the real purpose of the Red Coast Project, top-secret information that even many mid-level cadres at the base didn't know, she cut off her spiritual connection to the outside world and devoted herself to her work. Thereafter, she became even more deeply embedded in the technical core of Red Coast, and began to take on more important research topics. Commissar Lei never forgot that it was Chief Yang who first trusted Ye, but Lei was happy to assign important topics to her. Given Ye's status, she had no rights to the results of her research, and Lei, who had studied astrophysics, was a political officer who was also an intellectual, rare at the time. Thus, he could take credit for all of Ye's research results and papers, and cast himself as an exemplary political officer with both technical acumen and revolutionary zeal. The Red Coast project had initially requisitioned Ye because of a paper on an attempted mathematical model of the Sun she had published in the Journal of Astrophysics as a graduate student. Compared to the Earth, the Sun was a far simpler physical system, made almost entirely of hydrogen and helium. Though its physical processes were violent, they were relatively straightforward, only fusing hydrogen into helium. Thus, it was likely that a mathematical model of the Sun could describe it rather precisely. The paper was basic, but Lei and Yang saw in it a hope for a solution to a technical difficulty faced by the Red Coast monitoring system. Solar outages, a common problem in satellite communications, had always plagued the Red Coast monitoring operations. When the Earth, an artificial satellite, and the Sun are in a straight line, the line of sight from the ground-based antenna to the satellite will have the Sun as its background. The Sun is a giant source of electromagnetic radiation, and, as a result, satellite transmissions to the ground will be overwhelmed by interference from the solar radiation. This problem could not be completely solved, even in the 21st century. The interference that Red Coast had to deal with was similar, but the source of interference, the Sun, was between the source of the transmission, outer space, and the ground-based receiver. Compared to communication satellites, the solar outages suffered by Red Coast were more frequent and more severe. Red Coast Base as constructed was also much more modest than its original design, such that the transmission and monitoring systems shared the same antenna. This made the times available for monitoring even more precious, and solar outages even more of a problem. Lei and Yang's idea for eliminating interference was very simple. Ascertain the frequency spectrum and characteristics of solar radiation in the monitored range, and then filter it out digitally. Both of them were technical, and at that time, when the ignorant often led the knowledgeable, that was a rare bit of fortune. But Yang wasn't a specialist in astrophysics, and Lei had taken the path of becoming a political officer, which prevented him from accruing in-depth technical know-how. In reality, electromagnetic radiation from the Sun is only stable within the limited range from near ultraviolet to mid-infrared, including visible light. In other ranges, the radiation is quite volatile and unpredictable. To set the right expectations, Ye made it clear in her first research report that during periods of intense solar activity, sunspots, solar flares, coronal mass ejections, and so on, it was impossible to eliminate solar interference. Thus, her research target was limited to radiation within the frequency ranges monitored by Red Coast during periods of normal solar activity. Research conditions at the base weren't too bad. The library could obtain foreign language materials related to the topic, including timely European and American academic journals. In those years, this was no easy feat. Ye also could use the military phone line to connect to the two groups conducting solar science research within the Chinese Academy of Sciences and obtain their observation data by fax. After half a year of study, Ye saw no glimpse of hope. She quickly discovered that within the frequency ranges monitored by Red Coast, solar radiation fluctuated unpredictably. By analyzing large amounts of observed data, Ye discovered a puzzling mystery. Sometimes, during one of the sudden fluctuations in solar radiation, the surface of the Sun was calm. Since hundreds of thousands of kilometers of solar material would absorb any shortwave and microwave radiation originating from the core of the Sun, the radiation must have come from activities on its surface. So there should have been observable surface activity when these fluctuations occurred. If there were no corresponding surface disturbances, what caused these sudden changes to the narrow frequency ranges? The more she thought about it, the more mysterious it seemed. Eventually, Ye ran out of ideas and decided to give up. In her last report, she conceded that she could not solve the problem. This shouldn't have been a big deal. The military had asked several groups within universities and the Chinese Academy of Sciences to research the same issue, and all of those efforts had failed. But Yang wanted to try one more time, relying on Ye's extraordinary talent. Lei's agenda was even simpler. He just wanted Ye's paper. The research topic was highly theoretical and would show off his expertise and skill. Now that the chaos in society was finally subsiding, the demands on cadres were also changing. There was an acute need for men like him, politically mature and academically accomplished. Of course, he would have a bright future. As to whether the problem of interference from solar outages could be solved, he didn't really care. But in the end, Ya didn't hand in her report. She thought that if the research project were terminated, the base library would stop receiving foreign language journals and other research materials, and she would no longer have access to such a rich trove of astrophysics references. So she nominally continued her research, while in reality she focused on refining her mathematical model of the sun. One night, Ya was, as usual, the only person in the cold reading room of the base library. On the long table in front of her, a pile of documents and journals were spread open. After completing a set of tedious and cumbersome matrix calculations, she blew on her hands to warm them and picked up the latest issue of the Journal of Astrophysics to take a break. As she flipped through it, a brief note about Jupiter caught her attention. Last issue, in A New, Powerful Radiation Source Within the Solar System, Dr. Harry Peterson of Mount Wilson Observatory published a set of data accidentally obtained while observing Jupiter's precession on June 12th and July 2nd, during which strong electromagnetic radiation was detected, lasting 81 seconds and 76 seconds, respectively. The data included the frequency ranges of the radiation as well as other parameters. During the radio outbursts, Peterson also observed certain changes in the Great Red Spot. This discovery drew a lot of interest from planetary scientists. In this issue, G. Mackenzie's article argues that it was a sign of fusion starting within Jupiter's core. In the next issue, we will publish Inoue Kumoseki's article, which attributes the Jovian radio outbursts to a more complicated mechanism, the movements of internal metallic hydrogen plates, and gives a complete mathematical description. Ya clearly remembered the 2 dates noted in the paper. During those windows, the Red Coast monitoring system had also received strong interference from solar outages. She checked the operations diary and confirmed her memory. The times were close, but the solar outages had occurred 16 minutes and 42 seconds after the arrival of the Jovian radio outbursts on Earth. The 16 minutes and 42 seconds are critical. Ya tried to calm her wild heartbeat and asked the librarian to contact the National Observatory to obtain the ephemeris of the Earth's and Jupiter's positions during those 2 time periods. She drew a big triangle on the blackboard with the Sun, the Earth, and Jupiter at the vertices. She marked the distances along the 3 edges and wrote down the 2 arrival times next to the Earth. From the distance between the Earth and Jupiter, it was easy to figure out the time it took for the radio outbursts to travel between the 2. Then she calculated the time it would take the radio outbursts to go from Jupiter to the Sun, and then from the Sun to the Earth. The difference between the 2 was exactly 16 minutes and 42 seconds. Ya referred to her solar structure mathematical model and tried to find a theoretical explanation. Her eyes were drawn to her description of what she called energy mirrors within the solar radiation zone. Energy produced by reaction within the solar core is initially in the form of high-energy gamma rays. The radiation zone, the region of the Sun's interior that surrounds the core, absorbs these high-energy photons and re-emits them at a slightly lower energy level. After a long period of successive absorption and re-emission, a photon might take 1,000 years to leave the Sun. Gamma rays become X-rays, extreme, ultraviolet, then eventually turn into visible light and other forms of radiation. Such were the known facts about the Sun. But Ya's model led to a new result. As solar radiation dropped through these different frequencies on its way through the radiation zone, there were boundaries between the subzones for each type of radiation. As energy crossed each boundary, the radiation frequency stepped down a grade sharply. This was different from the traditional view that the radiation frequency lowered gradually as energy passed from the core outwards. Her calculations showed that these boundaries would reflect radiation coming from the lower frequency side, which was why she named the boundaries energy mirrors. Yeh had carefully studied these membrane-like boundary surfaces suspended in the high-energy plasma ocean of the Sun and discovered them to be full of wonderful properties. One of the most incredible characteristics she named gain reflectivity. However, the characteristic was so bizarre that it was hard to confirm, and even Yeh herself didn't quite believe it was real. It seemed more likely an artifact of some error in the dizzying, complex calculations. But now Yeh made the first step in confirming her guess about the gain reflectivity of solar energy mirrors. The energy mirrors not only reflected radiation coming from the lower frequency side, but amplified it. All the mysterious sudden fluctuations within narrow frequency bands that she had observed were in fact the result of other radiation coming from space being amplified after reflecting off an energy mirror in the Sun. That was why there were no observable disturbances on the surface of the Sun. This time, after the Jovian radio outbursts reached the Sun, they were re-emitted as if by a mirror, after being amplified about 100 million times. The Earth received both sets of emissions, before and after the amplification, separated by 16 minutes and 42 seconds. The Sun was an amplifier for radio waves. However, there was a question. The Sun must be receiving electromagnetic radiation from space every second, including radio waves emitted by the Earth. Why were only some of the waves amplified? The answer was simple. In addition to the selectivity of the energy mirrors for frequencies they would reflect, the main reason was the shielding effect of the solar convection zone. The endlessly boiling convection zone, situated outside the radiation zone, was the outermost liquid layer of the Sun. The radio waves coming from space must first penetrate the convection zone to reach the energy mirrors in the radiation zone, where they would be amplified and reflected back out. This meant that in order to reach the energy mirrors, the waves would have to be more powerful than a threshold value. The vast majority of Earth-based radio sources could not cross this threshold, but the Jovian radio outburst did. And Red Coast's maximum transmission power also exceeded the threshold. The problem with solar outages was not resolved, but another exciting possibility presented itself. Humans could use the Sun as a super antenna, and, through it, broadcast radio waves to the universe. The radio waves would be sent with the power of the Sun, hundreds of millions of times greater than the total usable transmission power on Earth. Earth civilization had a way to transmit at the level of a Kardashev Type II civilization. The next step was to compare the waveforms of the two Jovian radio outbursts with the waveforms of the solar outages received by Red Coast. If they matched, then her guess would receive further confirmation. Yeh made a request to the base leadership to contact Harry Peterson and obtain the waveform records of the two Jovian radio outbursts. This was not easy. It was difficult to find the right communication channels, and numerous bureaucracies required layers of formal paperwork. Any error could lead to her being suspected of acting as a foreign spy. So, Yeh had to wait. But there was a more direct way to prove the hypothesis. Red Coast itself could transmit radio waves directly at the Sun at a power level exceeding the threshold value. Yeh again made a request to the base leadership, but she didn't dare to give her real reason. It was too fantastic, and she would have been turned down for certain. Instead, she explained that she wanted to do an experiment for her solar research. The Red Coast transmission system would be used as a solar exploration radar, whose echoes could be analyzed to obtain some information about solar radiation. Lei and Yang both had deep technical backgrounds and wouldn't have been easily fooled, but the experiment described by Yeh did have real precedence in Western solar research. In fact, her suggestion was technically easier than the radar exploration of terrestrial planets already being conducted.
"Yeah, Wincia, you're getting out of line," said Commissar Lay. "Your research should be focused on theory. Do we really need to go to so much trouble?"
Yeah begged. "Commissar, it's possible that a big discovery will be made. Experiments are absolutely necessary. I just want to try it once, please."
Chief Yang said,
"Commissar Lay, maybe we should try once. It doesn't seem to be too difficult operationally. Receiving the echoes after transmission would take
10-15 minutes,
Lay said. Then Red Coast has just enough time to switch from transmission mode to monitoring mode.
Lay shook his head again.
"I know that it's technically and operationally feasible, but you, Chief Young, you just lack the sensitivity for this kind of thing. You want to aim a super-powerful radio beam at the red sun. Have you thought about the political symbolism of such an experiment?"
Yang and Yeah were both utterly stunned, but they did not think Lay's objection ridiculous. Just the opposite. They were horrified that they themselves had not thought of it. During those years, finding political symbolism in everything had reached absurd levels. The research reports Yeah turned in had to be carefully reviewed by Lay so that even technical terms related to the sun could be reportedly revised to remove political risk. Terms like sunspots were forbidden. An experiment that sent a powerful radio transmission at the sun could of course be interpreted in 1,000 positive ways, but a single negative interpretation would be enough to bring political disaster on everyone. Lay's reason for refusing to allow the experiment was truly unassailable. Yeah didn't give up, though. In fact, as long as she didn't take excessive risk, it wasn't difficult to accomplish her goal. The Red Coast transmitter was ultra-high-powered, but all of its components were domestically produced during the Cultural Revolution. As the quality of the components was not up to par, the fault rate was very high. After every 15th transmission, the entire system had to be overhauled, and after each overhaul, there would be a test transmission. Few people attended these tests, and the targets and other parameters were arbitrarily selected. One time, when she was on duty, Yeah was assigned to work during one of the test transmissions after an overhaul. Because a test transmission omitted many operational steps, only Yeah and 5 others were present. 3 of them were low-level operators who knew little about the principles behind the equipment. The remaining 2 were a technician and an engineer, both exhausted and not paying much attention after 2 days of overhaul work. Yeah first adjusted the test transmission power to exceed the threshold value for her gain-reflective solar energy mirror theory, using the maximum power of the Red Coast transmission system. Then she set the frequency to the value most likely to be amplified by the energy mirror. And under the guise of testing the antenna's mechanical components, she aimed it at the setting sun in the west. The content of the transmission remained the same as usual. This was a clear afternoon in the autumn of 1971. Afterwards, Yeah recalled the event many times, but couldn't remember any special feelings, except anxiety, a desire for the transmission to be completed quickly. First, she was afraid to be discovered by her colleagues. Even though she had thought of some excuses, it was still unusual to use maximum power for a test transmission, because doing so would wear down the components. In addition, the Red Coast transmission system's positioning equipment was never designed to be aimed at the sun. Yeah could feel the eyepiece growing hot. If it burned out, she would be in real trouble. As the sun set slowly in the west, Yeah had to manually track it. The Red Coast antenna seemed like a giant sunflower at that moment, slowly turning to follow the descending sun. By the time the red light indicating transmission completion lit up, she was already soaked in sweat. She glanced around. The 3 operators at the control panel were shutting down the equipment piece by piece in accordance with the instructions in the operating manual. The engineer was drinking a glass of water in a corner of the control room, and the technician was asleep in his chair. No matter how historians and writers later tried to portray the scene, The reality at the time was completely prosaic. The transmission completed, Ya rushed out of the control room and dashed into Yang Wei-Ning's office. Catching her breath, she said,
"Tell the base station to begin monitoring the 12,000 megahertz channel."
"What are we receiving?" Chief Yang looked in surprise at Ya, strands of hair stuck to her sweaty face. Compared to the highly sensitive Red Coast monitoring system, the conventional military-grade radio, normally used by the base for communicating with the outside, was only a toy.
"Maybe we'll get something. There's no time to change the Red Coast system to monitoring mode."
Normally, warming up and switching over to the monitoring system required a little more than 10 minutes, but right now the monitoring system was also being overhauled. Many modules had been taken apart and remained unassembled, rendering them inoperable in the short term. Yang stared at Ya for a few seconds, and then picked up the phone and ordered the communications office to follow Ya's direction.
"Given the low sensitivity of that radio, we can probably only receive signals from extraterrestrials on the moon." "The signal comes from the sun,"
Ya said. Outside the window, the sun's edge was already approaching the mountains on the horizon, red as blood.
"You used Red Coast to send a signal to the sun?"
Yang asked anxiously. Ya nodded.
"Don't tell anyone else. This must never happen again. Never!"
Yang looked behind him to be sure there was no one at the door. Ya nodded again.
"What's the point? The echo wave must be extremely weak, far outside the sensitivity of a conventional radio." "No. If my guess is right, we should get an extremely strong echo. It'll be more powerful than I can hardly imagine. As long as the transmission power exceeds a certain threshold, the sun can amplify the signal 100 million-fold."
Yang looked at Ya strangely. Ya said nothing. They both waited in silence. Yang could clearly hear Ya's breath and heartbeat. He hadn't paid much attention to what she had said, but the feelings he had buried in his heart for many years resurfaced. He could only restrain himself, waiting. 20 minutes later, Yang picked up the phone, called the communications office, and asked a few simple questions. He put the phone down.
"They received nothing."
Ya let out a long-held breath and eventually nodded.
"That American astronomer responded, though."
Yang took out a thick envelope covered with customs stamps and handed it to Ya. She tore the envelope open and scanned Harry Peterson's letter. The letter said that he had not imagined that there would be colleagues in China studying planetary electromagnetism, and that he wished to collaborate and exchange more information in the future. He had also sent 2 stacks of paper, the complete record of the waveforms of the radio outbursts from Jupiter. They were clearly photocopied from the long signal recording tape and would have to be pieced together. Ya took the dozens of sheets of photocopier paper and started lining them up in 2 columns on the floor. Halfway through the effort, she gave up any hope. She was very familiar with the waveforms of the interference from the 2 solar outages. They didn't match these 2. Ya slowly picked up the photocopies from the floor. Yang crouched down to help her. When he handed the stack of paper to this woman he loved with all his heart, he saw her smile. The smile was so sad that his heart trembled.
"What's wrong?"
he asked, not realizing that he had never spoken to her so softly.
"Nothing. I'm just waking up from a dream."
Ya smiled again. She took the stack of photocopies and the envelope and left the office. She went back to her room, picked up her lunchbox, and went to the cafeteria. Only Monteau buns and pickles were left, and the cafeteria workers told her impatiently that they were closing. So she had no choice but to carry her lunchbox outside and walk next to the lip of the cliff, where she sat down on the grass to chew the cold Monteau. The sun had already set. The greater Kingan Mountains were gray and indistinct, just like Ya's life. In this gray life, a dream appeared especially colorful and bright. But one always awoke from a dream, just like the sun, which, though it would rise again, brought no fresh hope. In that moment, Ya saw the rest of her life suffused with an endless grayness. With tears in her eyes, she smiled again, and continued to chew the cold manteau. Ya didn't know that at that moment, the first cry that could be heard in space from civilization on Earth was already spreading out from the sun to the universe at the speed of light. A star-powered radio wave, like a majestic tide, had already crossed the orbit of Jupiter. Right then, at the frequency of 12,000 megahertz, the sun was the brightest star in the entire Milky Way. 23. Red Coast 6. The next 8 years were among the most peaceful of Ya Winxia's life. The horror experienced during the Cultural Revolution gradually subsided, and she was finally able to relax a little. The Red Coast project completed its testing and breaking-in phases, settling down into routine operation. Fewer and fewer technical problems remained, and both work and life became regular. In peace, what had been suppressed by anxiety and fear began to reawaken. Ya found that the real pain had just begun. Nightmarish memories, like embers coming back to life, burned more and more fiercely, searing her heart. For most people, perhaps time would have gradually healed these wounds. After all, during the Cultural Revolution, many people suffered fates similar to hers, and compared to many of them, Ya was relatively fortunate. But Ya had the mental habits of a scientist, and she refused to forget. Rather, she looked with a rational gaze on the madness and hatred that had harmed her. Ya's rational consideration of humanity's evil side began the day she read Silent Spring. As she grew closer to Yan Weining, he was able to get her many classics of foreign language philosophy and history under the guise of gathering technical research materials. The bloody history of humanity shocked her, and the extraordinary insights of the philosophers also led her to understand the most fundamental and secret aspects of human nature. Indeed, even on top of Radar Peak, a place the world almost forgot, the madness and irrationality of the human race were constantly on display. Ya saw that the forest below the peak continued to fall to the deranged logging by her former comrades. Patches of bare earth grew daily, as though those parts of the greater Kingan Mountains had had their skin torn off. When those patches grew into regions and then into a connected whole, the few surviving trees seemed rather abnormal. To complete the slash-and-burn plan, fires were lit on the bare fields, and Radar Peak became the refuge for birds escaping the fiery inferno. As the fires raged, the sorrowful cries of birds with singed feathers at the base never ceased. The insanity of the human race had reached its historical zenith. The Cold War was at its height. Nuclear missiles capable of destroying the Earth 10 times over could be launched at a moment's notice, spread out among the countless missile silos dotting 2 continents and hidden within ghost-like nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarines patrolling deep under the sea. A single Lafayette or Yankee-class submarine held enough warheads to destroy hundreds of cities and kill hundreds of millions. But most people continued their lives as if nothing was wrong. As an astrophysicist, Ya was strongly against nuclear weapons. She knew this was a power that should belong only to the stars. She knew also that the universe had even more terrible forces: black holes, antimatter, and more. Compared to those forces, a thermonuclear bomb was nothing but a tiny candle. If humans obtained mastery over one of those other forces, the world might be vaporized in a moment. In the face of madness, rationality was powerless. 4 years after entering Red Coast Base, Ya and Yang married. Yang truly loved her. For love, he gave up his future. The fiercest stage of the Cultural Revolution was over, and the political climate had grown somewhat milder. Yang wasn't persecuted exactly for his marriage. However, because he married a woman who had been deemed to be a counter-revolutionary, he was viewed as politically immature and lost his position as chief engineer. The only reason that he and his wife were allowed to stay on the base as ordinary technicians was because the base could not do without their technical skills. Ya accepted Yang's proposal, mainly out of gratitude. If he hadn't brought her into this safe haven in her most perilous moment, she would probably no longer be alive. Yang was a talented man, cultured and with good taste. She didn't find him unpleasant, but her heart was like ashes from which the flame of love could no longer be lit. As she pondered human nature, Ya was faced with an ultimate loss of purpose and sank into another spiritual crisis. She had once been an idealist who needed to give all her talent to a great goal, but now she realized that all she had done was meaningless, and the future could not have any meaningful pursuits either. As this mental state persisted, she gradually felt more and more alienated from the world. She didn't belong. The sense of wandering in the spiritual wilderness tormented her. After she made a home with Yang, her soul became homeless. One night, Ya was working the night shift. This was the loneliest time. In the deep silence of midnight, the universe revealed itself to its listeners as a vast desolation. What Ya disliked most was seeing the waves that slowly crawled across the display, a visual record of the meaningless noise Red Coast picked up from space. Ya felt this interminable wave was an abstract view of the universe, one end connected to the endless past, the other to the endless future, and in the middle only the ups and downs of random chance. Without life, without pattern, the peaks and valleys at different heights like uneven grains of sand, the whole curve like a one-dimensional desert made of all the grains of sand lined up in a row, lonely, desolate, so long that it was intolerable. You could follow it and go forward or backward as long as you liked, but you'd never find the end. On this day, however, Ya saw something odd when she glanced at the waveform display. Even experts had a hard time telling with the naked eye whether a waveform carried information. But Ya was so familiar with the noise of the universe that she could tell that the wave that now moved in front of her eyes had something extra. The thin curve, rising and falling, seemed to possess a soul. She was certain that the radio signal before had been modulated by intelligence. She rushed to another terminal and checked the computer's rating of the signal's recognizability, AAAAA. Before this, no radio signal received by Red Coast ever garnered a recognizability rating above C. An A rating meant the likelihood that the transmission contained intelligent information was greater than 90%. A rating of AAAAA was a special, extreme case. It meant the received transmission used the exact same coding language as Red Coast's own outbound transmission. Ya turned on the Red Coast deciphering system. The software attempted to decipher any signal whose recognizability rating was above B. During the entire time that the Red Coast project had been running, it had never been invoked even once in real use. Based on test data, deciphering a transmission suspected of being a message might require a few days or even a few months of computing time, and the result would be failure more than half the time. But this time, as soon as the file containing the original transmission was submitted, the display showed that the deciphering was complete. Ya opened the resulting document, and for the first time, a human read a message from another world. The content was not what anyone had imagined. It was a warning, repeated 3 times. Do not answer, do not answer, do not answer. Still caught up by the dizzying excitement and confusion, Ya deciphered a second message. This world has received your message. I am a pacifist in this world. It is the luck of your civilization that I am the first to receive your message. I am warning you. Do not answer. Do not answer. Do not answer. There are tens of millions of stars in your direction. As long as you do not answer, this world will not be able to ascertain the source of your transmission. But if you do answer, the source will be located right away. Your planet will be invaded. Your world will be conquered. Do not answer. Do not answer. Do not answer. As she read the flashing green text on the display, Ya was no longer capable of thinking clearly. Her mind, inhibited by shock and excitement, could only understand this. No more than 9 years had passed since the time she had sent the message to the sun. Then the source of this transmission must be around 4 light-years away. It could only have come from the closest extrasolar stellar system, Alpha Centauri. The universe was not desolate. The universe was not empty. The universe was full of life. Humankind had cast their gaze to the end of the universe, but they had no idea that intelligent life already existed around the stars closest to them. Ya stared at the waveform display. The signal continued to stream from the universe into the Red Coast antenna. She opened up another interface and began real-time deciphering. The messages began to show up immediately on the screen. During the next 4 hours, Ya learned of the existence of Trisolaris, learned of the civilization that had been reborn again and again, and learned of their plan to migrate to the stars. At 4 a.m, the transmission from Alpha Centauri ended. The deciphering system continued to run uselessly and emitted an unceasing string of failure codes. The Red Coast monitoring system was once again only hearing the noise of the universe. But Ya was certain that what she had just experienced was not a dream. The sun really was an amplifying antenna. But why had her experiment 8 years ago not received any echoes? Why had the waveforms of Jupiter's radio outbursts not matched the later radiation from the sun? Later, Ya came up with many reasons. It was possible that the base communication office couldn't receive radio waves at that frequency. Or maybe the office did receive the echo, but it sounded like noise, and so the operator thought it was nothing. As for the waveforms, it was possible that when the sun amplified the radio waves, it also added another wave to it. It would likely be a periodic wave that could be easily filtered out by the alien deciphering system. But to her unaided eye, the waveform from Jupiter and from the sun would appear very different. Years later, after Ya had left Red Coast, she would manage to confirm her last guess. The sun had added a sine wave. She looked around alertly. There were 3 others in the main computer room. 2 of the 3 were chatting in a corner, while the last was napping before a terminal. In the data analysis section of the monitoring system, only the 2 terminals in front of her could view the recognizability rating of a signal and access the deciphering system. Maintaining her composure, she worked quickly and moved all of the received messages to a multiply encrypted, invisible subdirectory. Then she copied over a segment of noise received a year ago as a substitute for the transmission received during the last 5 hours. Finally, from the terminal, she placed a short message into the Red Coast transmission buffer. Ya got up and left the monitoring main control room. A chilly wind blew against her feverish face. Dawn had just brightened the eastern sky, and she followed the dimly lit, pebble-paved path to the transmission main control room. Above her, the Red Coast antenna lay open, silently, like a giant palm toward the universe. The dawn turned the guard at the door into a silhouette, and as usual, he did not pay attention to Ya as she entered. The transmission main control room was much dimmer than the monitoring main control room. Ya passed through rows of cabinets to stand in front of the control panel and flip more than a dozen switches with practiced ease to warm up the transmission system. The 2 men on duty next to the control panel looked up at her with sleepy eyes, and one turned to glance at the clock. Then one of them went back to his nap, while the other flipped through a well-thumbed newspaper. At the base, Ya had no political status, but she did have some freedom in technical matters. She often tested the equipment before a transmission. Although she was early today, the transmission wasn't scheduled to occur until 3 hours later. Warming up a bit early wasn't that unusual. What happened next was the longest half hour of her life. During this time, adjusted the transmission frequency to the optimal frequency for amplification by the solar energy mirror, and increased the transmission power to maximum. Then, putting her eyes to the eyepiece of the optical positioning system, she watched the sun rise above the horizon, activated the positioning system for the antenna, and slowly aligned it with the sun. As the gigantic antenna turned, the rumbling noise shook the main control room. One of the men on duty looked at again, but said nothing. The sun was now completely above the horizon. The crosshair of the Red Coast positioning system was aimed at its upper edge to account for the time it would take for the radio wave to travel to the sun. The transmission system was ready. The transmit button was a long rectangle, very similar to the space key on a computer keyboard, except that it was red. Ya's hand hovered 2 centimeters above it. The fate of the entire human race was now tied to these slender fingers. Without hesitation, pressed the button.
"What are you doing?"
one of the men on duty asked, still sleepy. Smiled at him and said nothing. She pressed a yellow button to stop the transmission. Then she moved the control stick until the antenna was pointed elsewhere. She left the control panel and walked away. The man looked at his watch. It was time to get off work. He picked up the diary and thought about recording Ya's operation of the transmission system. It was, after all, out of the ordinary. But then he looked at the paper tape and saw that she had transmitted for no more than 3 seconds. He tossed the diary back, yawned, put on his army cap, and left. The message that was winging its way to the sun said, "Come here. I will help you conquer this world. Our civilization is no longer capable of solving its own problems. We need your force to intervene." The newly risen sun dazzled Wenxia. Not too far from the door of the main control room, she collapsed onto the lawn in a faint. When she woke up, she found herself in the base clinic. Next to her bed sat Yang, watching her with concern, like that time many years ago on the helicopter. The doctor told to be careful and get plenty of rest. "You are pregnant," he said. 24. Rebellion. After Wenxia finished recounting the history of her first contact with Tri-Solaris, the abandoned cafeteria remained silent. Many present were apparently just hearing the complete story for the first time. Wang was deeply absorbed by the narrative and temporarily forgot about the danger and terror he faced. Unable to stop himself, he asked,
"How did the ETO then develop to its present scale?"
Replied,
"I'd have to start with how I got to know Evans. But every comrade here already knows that part of history, so we shouldn't waste time on it now. I can tell you later. However, whether we'll have such an opportunity depends on you. Xiao Wang, let's talk about your nanomaterial." "This Lord that you talk about, why is it so afraid of nanomaterial?" "Because it can allow humans to escape gravity and engage in space construction at a much larger scale." "The space elevator?" Wang suddenly understood. "Yes. If ultra-strong nanomaterials could be mass-produced, then that would lay the technical foundation for building a space elevator from the ground up to a geostationary point in space. For our Lord, this is but a tiny invention. But for humans on Earth, its meaning would be significant. With this technology, humans could easily enter near-Earth space and build up large-scale defensive structures. Thus, this technology must be extinguished. What is at the end of the countdown?
Wong asked the question that frightened him the most. Ya smiled.
I don't know. But trying to stop me is useless. This is not basic research. Based on what we've already found out, someone else can figure out the rest.
Wong's voice was loud but anxious.
Yes, it is rather useless. It's far more effective to confuse the researchers' minds. But, like you point out, we didn't stop the progress in time. After all, what you do is applied research. Our technique is far more effective against basic research. Speaking of basic research, how did your daughter die?
The question silenced Ya for a few seconds. Wong noticed that her eyes dimmed almost imperceptibly, but she then resumed the conversation.
Indeed, compared to our Lord, who possesses peerless strength, everything we do is meaningless. We're just doing whatever we can.
Just as she finished speaking, several loud booms rang out, and the doors to the cafeteria broke open. A team of soldiers holding submachine guns rushed in. Wong realized that they were not armed police, but the real army. Noiselessly, they proceeded along the walls and soon surrounded the rebels of the ETO. Shuqiang was the last to enter. His jacket was open, and he held the barrel of a pistol so that the grip was like the head of a hammer. Da Shi looked around arrogantly, then suddenly dashed forward. His hand flashed, and there was the dull thud of metal striking against a skull. An ETO rebel fell to the ground, and the gun that he was trying to draw tumbled to fall some distance away. Several soldiers began to shoot at the ceiling, and dust and debris fell. Someone grabbed Wang Miao and pulled him away from the ETO ranks until he was safe behind a row of soldiers.
Drop all your weapons onto the table. I swear I'm gonna kill the next son of a bitch who tries anything.
Da Shi pointed at the submachine guns arrayed behind him.
I know that none of you is afraid to die, but we're not afraid either. I'm gonna say this up front. Normal police procedures and laws don't apply to you. Even the human laws of warfare no longer apply to you. Since you've decided to treat the entire human race as your enemy, there's no longer anything we wouldn't do to you.
There was some commotion among the ETO members, but no one panicked. Ya's face remained impassive. 3 people suddenly rushed out of the crowd, including the young woman who had twisted Panhan's neck. They ran toward the 3-body sculpture, and each grabbed one of the spheres and held it in front of his or her chest. The young woman raised the bright metal sphere before her with both hands, as though she were getting ready to start a gymnastics routine. Smiling, she said,
"Officers, we hold in our hands 3 nuclear bombs, each with a yield of about 1.5 kilotons. Not too big, since we like small toys. This is the detonator."
Everyone in the cafeteria froze. The only one who moved was Shuqiang. He put his gun back into the holster under his left arm and placed his hands together calmly.
"Our demand is simple. Let the commander go,"
the young woman said.
"Then we can play whatever game you want."
Her tone suggested that she wasn't afraid of Shuqiang and the soldiers at all.
"I stay with my comrades,"
Ya said calmly.
Can you confirm her claim?
Da Shi asked an officer next to him, an explosives expert. The officer threw a bag in front of the 3 ETO members holding the spheres. One of the ETO fighters picked up the bag and took out a spring scale, a bigger version of the ones some customers brought to street markets to verify the portions measured by vendors. He placed his metal sphere into the bag, attached it to the spring scale, and held it aloft. The gauge extended about halfway and stopped. The young woman chuckled. The explosives expert also laughed, contemptuously. The ETO member took out the sphere and tossed it on the ground. Another ETO fighter picked up the scale and the bag and repeated the procedure with his sphere, and ended up also tossing the sphere to the ground. The young woman laughed once more and picked up the bag herself. She loaded her sphere into the bag, hung it on the hook of the scale, and the gauge immediately dropped to its bottom, the spring in the scale having been fully extended. The smile on the explosives expert's face froze. He whispered to Da Shi,
"Damn, they really do have one."
Da Shi remained impassive. The explosives expert said,
"We can at least confirm that there are heavy elements, fissile material inside. We don't know if the detonation mechanism works."
The flashlights attached to the soldiers' guns focused on the young woman holding the nuclear bomb. While she held the destructive power of 1.5 kilotons of TNT in her hands, she smiled brightly, as though enjoying applause and praise on a spotlit stage.
"I have an idea. Shoot the sphere."
The explosives expert whispered to Da Shi.
"Won't that set off the bomb?"
"The conventional explosives around the outside will go off, but the explosion will be scattered. It won't lead to the kind of precise compression of the fissile material in the center necessary for a nuclear explosion."
Da Shi stared at the nuclear woman, saying nothing.
"How about snipers?"
Almost imperceptibly, Da Shi shook his head.
"Well, there's no good position. She's sharp as a tack. As soon as she's targeted by a sniper scope, she'll know."
Da Shi strode forward. He pushed the crowd apart and stood in the middle of the empty space.
"Stop!"
The young woman warned Da Shi, staring at him intently. Her right thumb was poised over the detonator. Her face was no longer smiling in the flashlight beams.
"Calm down,"
Da Shi said, standing about 7 or 8 meters from her. He took an envelope from his pocket.
"I have some information you'll definitely want to know. Your mother has been found."
The young woman's feverish eyes dimmed. At that moment, her eyes were truly windows to her soul. Da Shi took 2 steps forward. He was now no more than 5 meters from her. She raised the bomb and warned him with her eyes, but she was already distracted. One of the 2 ETO members who had tossed away fake bombs strode toward Da Shi to take the envelope from him. As the man blocked the woman's view of Da Shi, he drew his gun with a lightning-fast motion. The woman only saw a flash by the ear of the man trying to take the letter from Da Shi before the bomb in her hands exploded. After hearing the muffled explosion, Wong saw nothing before his eyes but darkness. Someone dragged him out of the cafeteria. Thick yellow smoke poured out of the door, and a cacophony of shouting and gunshots came from inside. From time to time, people rushed through the smoke and out of the cafeteria. Wong got up and tried to go back into the cafeteria, but the explosives expert grabbed him around the waist and stopped him.
"Careful! Radiation!"
The chaos eventually subsided. More than a dozen ETO fighters were killed in the gunfight. The rest, more than 200, including Yawinsia, were arrested. The explosion had turned the nuclear woman into a bloody mess, but she was the only casualty of the aborted bomb. The man who had tried to take the letter from Da Shi was severely injured, but since his body had shielded Da Shi, his wounds were light. However, like everyone else who remained in the cafeteria after the explosion, Shi suffered severe radiation contamination. Through the small window of an ambulance, Wong stared at Da Shi, who was lying inside. A wound on Da Shi's head continued to ooze blood. The nurse who was dressing the wound wore transparent protective gear. Da Shi and Wong could only talk through their mobile phones.
"Who was that young woman's mother?"
Wong asked. Da Shi grinned.
"Fucked if I know. Just a guess. A girl like that most likely has mother issues. After doing this for more than 20 years, I'm pretty good at reading people."
"I bet you're happy to be proven right." there really was someone behind all this.
Wong forced himself to smile, hoping Da Shi could see it.
Buddy, you're the one who was right.
Da Shi laughed, shaking his head.
I would never have thought that actual fucking aliens would be involved.
25. The deaths of Lei Zicheng and Yang Weining. Interrogator. Name? Ya Wenxia.
Ya Wenxia.
Interrogator. Birthday? Yeah.
June 1943.
Interrogator. Employment? Yeah.
Professor of Astrophysics at Tsinghua University. Retired in 2004.
In consideration of your health, you may stop the interrogation temporarily at any time.
Thank you. I'm fine.
We're only conducting a regular criminal investigation now, and won't get into more sensitive matters. We would like to finish quickly. We hope you'll cooperate.
I know what you're referring to. Yes, I'll cooperate.
Our investigation revealed that while you were working at Red Coast Base, you were suspected of murder.
I did kill 2 people.
When?
The afternoon of October 21st, 1979.
Names of the victims?
Base Commissar Lei Zicheng and my husband, Base Engineer Yang Weining.
Explain your motive for murder.
Can I assume that you understand the relevant background?
I know the basics. If something is unclear, I'll ask you.
Good. On the day when I received the extraterrestrial communication and replied, I learned that I wasn't the only one to get the message. Lei did as well. Lei was a typical political cadre of the time, so he possessed an extremely keen sense for politics and saw everything through an ideological lens. Unbeknownst to most of the technical staff at Red Coast Base, he ran a small program in the background on the main computer. This program constantly read from the transmission and reception buffers and stored the results in a hidden encrypted file. This way there would be a copy of everything Red Coast sent and received that only he could read. It was from this copy that he discovered the extraterrestrial message. On the afternoon after I sent my message toward the rising sun, and shortly after I learned that I was pregnant at the base clinic, Lei called me to his office, and I saw that his terminal displayed the message from Tri-Solaris that I had received the night before.
8 hours have passed since you received the first message. Instead of making a report, you deleted the original message and maybe hid a copy. Isn't that right?
I kept my head down and did not reply.
I know your next move. You planned to reply. If I hadn't discovered this in time, you could have ruined all human civilization. Of course, I'm not saying that we're afraid of an interstellar invasion. Even if we assume the worst, and that really did happen, the outer space invaders would surely drown in the ocean of the people's righteous war.
I realized then that he didn't know that I'd already replied. When I placed the answer into the transmission buffer, I didn't use the regular file interface. Luckily, this got around his monitoring program.
Yeah, Wenxia, I knew you were capable of something like this. You've always held a deep hatred toward the party and the people. You would seize any opportunity for revenge. Do you know the consequences of your actions?
Of course I knew, so I nodded. Lei was silent for a moment, but what he said next was unexpected.
Yeah, Wenxia, I have no pity for you at all. You've always been a class enemy who views the people as your adversaries. But I've served many years with Yang. I cannot bear to see him ruined along with you, and I certainly cannot allow his child to be ruined as well. You're pregnant, aren't you?"
What he said wasn't idle speculation. During that era, my deeds would certainly have implicated my husband if revealed, regardless of whether he had anything to do with them. Lay kept his voice very low.
"Right now, only you and I know what happened. What we must do is to minimize the impact of your actions. Pretend that it never happened and never mention it to anyone, including Young. I'll take care of the rest. As long as you cooperate, you can avoid the disastrous consequences."
I immediately knew what Lay was after. He wanted to become the first man to discover extraterrestrial intelligence. It really was a great opportunity to get his name into the history textbooks. I assented. Then I left his office. I'd already decided everything. I took a small wrench and went to the equipment closet for the processing module of the receiver. Because I often needed to inspect the equipment, no one paid attention. I opened the main cabinet and carefully loosened the bolt that secured the ground wire to the bottom. The interference on the receiver suddenly increased, and the ground resistance went up from 0.6 ohms to 5 ohms. The technician on duty thought it was a problem with the ground wire because that kind of malfunction happened a lot. It was an easy diagnosis. He would never have guessed that the problem was at this end, at the top of the ground wire, because this end was securely fastened, out of the way, and I told him that I had just inspected it. The top of Radar Peak had an unusual geological feature. A layer of clay more than a dozen meters thick, poor conductivity, covered it. When the ground wire wasn't buried deeply, ground resistance was invariably too high. However, the ground wire couldn't be sunk too deep either, because the clay layer had a strong corrosive effect, and after a while it would corrode the middle section of the ground wire. In the end, the only solution was to drape the ground wire over the lip of the cliff until the tip was below the clay layer, and then bury the ground terminal into the cliff at that point. Even so, the grounding wasn't very stable, and the resistance was often excessive. Whenever such problems occurred, the trouble always involved the part of the wire going into the cliff. Whoever was assigned to repair it would have to go over the edge of the cliff, dangling on ropes. The technician on duty informed the maintenance squad of the issue. One of the soldiers in the squad tied a rope to an iron post and then rappelled down the cliff. After half an hour down below, he climbed back up, soaked in sweat, saying that he couldn't find the malfunction. It seemed that the next monitoring session would have to be delayed. There was no choice but to inform the base command center. I waited by the iron post at the top of the cliff. Very soon, just as I had planned, Lei Zichang came back with that soldier. To be honest, Lei was very dedicated to his job and faithfully followed the demands placed on political officers during that era. Become a part of the masses and always be on the front line. Maybe it was all for show, but he really was a good performer. Whenever there was some difficult and perilous work at the base, he was sure to volunteer. One of the tasks that he performed more than anyone else was to repair the ground wire, a task both dangerous and tiring. Even though this job wasn't particularly demanding technically, it did benefit from experience. There were many causes of malfunction, a loose contact due to exposure to open air, difficult to detect. Or possibly the location where the ground wire went into the cliff was too dry. The volunteer soldiers responsible for external maintenance were all new, and none had much experience. so I had guessed that Lay would most likely show up. He put on the safety harness and went over the cliff edge on the rope, as though I didn't exist. I made some excuse to get rid of the soldier who brought him, so that I was the only one left on the cliff. Then I took a short hacksaw out of my pocket. It was made from a longer saw blade broken into 3 pieces and then stacked together. With the stacked blades, any cut I made would be particularly ragged, and it would not be obvious later that the rope was cut through with a tool. Just then, my husband, Yang Wei-ning, showed up. After I explained to him what had happened, he looked over the cliff edge. Then he said that to inspect the ground terminal in the cliff face required digging, and the work would be too much for just Lay. He wanted to go down to help, so he put on the safety harness left by that other soldier. I asked him to use another rope, but he said no. The rope that Lay was on was thick and sturdy, and could easily bear the weight of 2. I insisted, so he told me to go get the rope. By the time I rushed back to the cliff with the rope, he had already gone down over the side. I poked my head over the edge and saw that he and Lay had already finished their inspection and were climbing back up. Lay was in the front. There would never be another chance. I took out my hacksaw and cut through the rope.
Interrogator: I want to ask a question, but I won't record the answer. How did you feel at the time?
Yeah. Calm. I did it without feeling anything. I had finally found a goal to which I could devote myself. I didn't care what price had to be paid, either by me or by others. I also knew that the entire human race would pay an unprecedented price for this goal. This was a very insignificant beginning.
All right. Continue.
I heard 2 or 3 surprised cries, and then the sound of bodies slamming against the rocks at the cliff bottom. After a while, I saw that the stream at the foot of the cliff had turned red. That's all I'll say about that.
I understand. This is the record. Please check it over carefully. If there are no errors, please sign it. 26. No one repents. The deaths of Lay and Yang were treated as accidents. Everybody at the base knew that Ye and Yang were a happy couple, and no one suspected her. A new commissar came to the base, and life returned to its habitual peace. The tiny life inside Ye grew bigger every day, and she also felt the world outside change. One day, the security platoon commander asked Ye to come to the gatehouse at the entrance to the base. When she entered the gatehouse, she was surprised to see 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, about 15 or 16. They all wore old coats and dog fur hats, obviously locals. The guard on duty told her that they came from the village of Chijiatun. They had heard that the people on Radar Peak were learned and had come to ask some questions related to their studies. Ye wondered how they dared to come on to Radar Peak. This was a restricted military zone, and the guards were authorized to warn intruders only once before shooting. The guards saw that Ye was puzzled and explained that they had just received orders that Red Coast Base's security rating had been reduced. The locals were allowed onto Radar Peak as long as they stayed outside the base. Several local peasants had already come yesterday to bring vegetables. One of the children took out a worn-out middle school physics textbook. His hands were dirty and cracked like tree bark. In a thick northeastern accent, he asked a simple physics question. The textbook said that a body in free fall is under constant acceleration, but will always reach a terminal velocity. They had been thinking about this for several nights and could not understand why.
You walked all this way just to ask this?
Ye asked.
Teacher Ye, don't you know that they've restarted the exam?
the girl said excitedly.
The exam. The National College Entrance Exam. Whoever studies hard and gets the best score gets to go to college. It began 2 years ago. Didn't you know? There's no need for recommendations anymore? No. Anyone can take the exam. Even the children of the 5 black categories in the village can take it.
Ya was stunned. This change left her with mixed feelings. Only after a while did she realize that the children were still waiting with their books held up. She hurriedly answered their question, explaining that it was due to air resistance reaching equilibrium against the force of gravity. Then she promised that if they encountered any difficulties in their studies in the future, they could always come to her for help. 3 days later, 7 children came to seek Ya. In addition to the 3 who had come last time, there were 4 more from villages located even farther away. The third time, 15 children came to find her, and even a teacher at a small-town high school came along. Because there was a shortage of teachers, he had to teach physics, math, and chemistry, and he came to ask Ya for some help on teaching. The man was over 50 years old, and his face was already full of wrinkles. He was very nervous in front of Ya and spilled books everywhere. After they left the gatehouse, Ya heard him say to the students,
"Children, that was a scientist. A real bona fide scientist."
After that, children would come to her for tutoring every few days. Sometimes there were so many of them that the gatehouse couldn't accommodate them all. With the permission of the officers in charge of base security, the guards would escort them to the cafeteria. There, Ya put up a small blackboard and taught the children. It was dark by the time Ya got off work on the eve of Chinese New Year, 1980. Most people at the base had already left Radar Peak for the 3-day holiday, and it was quiet everywhere. Ya returned to her room. This was once the home of her and Yang Weining, but now it was empty, her only companion the unborn child within her. In the night outside, the cold wind of the greater Kingon Mountains screamed, carrying with it the faint sound of firecrackers going off in the village of Chijiatun. Loneliness pressed down on Ya like a giant hand, and she felt herself being crushed, compressed, until she was so small that she disappeared into an invisible corner of the universe. Just then, someone knocked on her door. When she opened it, Ya first saw the guard, and then, behind him, the fire of several pine branch torches flickering in the cold wind. The torches were held aloft by a crowd of children, their faces bright red from the cold, and icicles hung from their hats. When they came into her room, they seemed to bring the cold air in with them. 2 of the boys, thinly dressed, had suffered the most. They had taken off their thick coats and wrapped them around something that they carried in their arms. Unwrapping the coats revealed a large pot, the fermented cabbage and pork dumplings inside still steaming hot. That year, 8 months after she sent her signal toward the sun, Ya went into labor. Because the baby was malpositioned and her body was weak, the base clinic couldn't handle her case and had to send her to the nearest town hospital. This became one of the hardest times in Ya's life. After enduring a great deal of pain and losing a large amount of blood, she sank into a coma. Through a blur, she could only see 3 hot, blinding suns slowly orbiting around her, cruelly roasting her body. This state lasted for some time, and she hazily thought it was probably the end for her. It was her hell. The fire of the 3 suns would torment her and burn her forever. This was punishment for her betrayal, the betrayal that exceeded all others. She sank into terror, not for her, but for her unborn child. Was the child still in her? Or had she already been born into this hell to suffer eternally with her? She didn't know how much time had passed. Gradually, the 3 suns moved farther away. After a certain distance, they suddenly shrank and turned into crystalline flying stars. The air around her cooled, and her pain lessened. She finally awoke. Ya heard a cry next to her. Turning her head with great effort, she saw the baby's pink, wet little face. The doctor told Ya that she had lost more than 2,000 milliliters of blood. Dozens of peasants from Chijiatun had come to donate blood to her. Many of the peasants had children who Ye had tutored, but most had no connection to her at all, having only heard her name from the children and their parents. Without them, she would certainly have died. Ye's living situation became a problem after the birth of her child. The difficult birth had damaged her health. It was impossible for her to stay at the base with the baby all by herself, and she had no relatives who could help. Just then, an old couple living in Chijiatun came to talk to the base leaders and explained that they could take Ye and her baby home with them and take care of them. The old man used to be a hunter and also gathered some herbs for traditional medicine. Later, after the forest around the area was lost to logging, the couple had turned to farming, but people still called him Hunter Chi out of habit. They had 2 sons and 2 daughters. The daughters were married and had moved out. One of the sons was a soldier away from home, and the other was married and lived with them. The daughter-in-law had also just given birth. Ye still hadn't been rehabilitated politically, and the base leadership was unsure about this suggested solution. But in the end, there was no other way, and so they allowed the couple to take Ye and the baby home from the hospital on a sled. Ye lived for more than half a year with his peasant family in the greater Kingan Mountains. She was so weak after giving birth that her milk did not come in. During this time, the baby girl, Yongdong, was breastfed by all the women of the village. The one who nursed her the most was Hunter Chi's daughter-in-law, called Fang. Fang had the strong, solid frame of the women of the Northeast. She ate sorghum every day, and her large breasts were full of milk, even though she was feeding 2 babies at the same time. Other nursing women in Chijiatun also came to feed Yongdong. They liked her, saying that the baby had the same clever air as her mother. Gradually, Hunter Chi's home became the gathering place for all the women of the village. Old and young, matrons and maidens, they all liked to stop by when they had nothing else going on. They admired Ye and were curious about her, and she found that she had many women's topics to discuss with them. On countless days, Ye held Yongdong and sat with the other women of the village in the yard, surrounded by birch posts. Next to her was a lazy black dog and the playing children, bathing in the warm sunlight. She paid attention especially to the women with the copper tobacco pipes. Leisurely they blew smoke out of their mouths, and the smoke, filled with sunlight, gave off a silvery glow, much like the fine hairs on their plump limbs. One time, one of them handed her the long-stemmed cupronickel pipe and told her it would make her feel better. She took only 2 hits before she became dizzy, and they laughed about it for several days. As for the men, Ye had little to say to them. The matters that occupied them all day also seemed outside her understanding. She gathered that they were interested in planting some ginseng for cash, while the government seemed to be relaxing policies a little, but they didn't quite have the courage to try. They all treated Ye with great respect and were very polite toward her. She didn't pay much attention to this at first, but after a while, after observing how those men roughly beat their wives and flirted outrageously with the widows in the village, saying things that made her blush, she finally realized how precious their respect was. Every few days, one of them would bring a hare or pheasant he had caught to Hunter Chi's home. They also gave Yongdong strange and quaint toys that they'd made with their own hands. In Ye's memory, these months seemed to belong to someone else, like a segment of another life that had drifted into hers like a feather. This period condensed in her memory into a series of classical paintings, not Chinese brush paintings, but European oil paintings. Chinese brush paintings are full of blank spaces, but life in Chijiatun had no blank spaces. Like classical oil paintings, it was filled with thick, rich, solid colors. Everything was warm and intense. The heated Kong stove beds lined with thick layers of Ura sedge, the Guangdong and Mohi tobacco stuffed in copper pipes, the thick and heavy sorghum meal, the 65-proof baijiu distilled from sorghum. All of these blended into a quiet and peaceful life, like the creek at the edge of the village. Most memorable to Ya were the evenings. Hunter Chi's son was away in the city selling mushrooms, the first to leave the village to earn money elsewhere, so she shared a room in his house with Fang. Back then there was no electricity in the village, and every evening the two huddled around a kerosene lamp. Ya would read while Fang did her needlework. Ya would lean closer and closer to the lamp without noticing, and her bangs would often get singed, at which point the two of them would glance up and smile at each other. Fang, of course, never had this happen to her. She had very sharp eyes and could do detailed work even in the dim light from heating charcoal. The two babies, not even half a year old, would be sleeping together on the Kong next to them. Ya loved to watch them sleep, their even breathing the only sound in the room. At first, Ya did not like sleeping on the heated Kong, and often got sick, but she gradually got used to it. As she slept, she would imagine herself becoming a baby sleeping in someone's warm lap. The person who held her wasn't her father or mother, or her dead husband. She didn't know who it was. The feeling was so real that she would wake up with tears on her face. One time, she put down her book and saw that Fang was holding the cloth shoe she was stitching over her knee and staring into the kerosene lamp without moving. When she realized that Ya was looking at her, Fang asked,
"Sister, why do you think the stars in the sky don't fall down?"
Ya examined Fang. The kerosene lamp was a wonderful artist and created a classical painting with dignified colors and bright strokes. Fang had her coat draped over her shoulders, exposing her red belly band, and a strong, graceful arm. The glow from the kerosene lamp painted her figure with vivid, warm colors, while the rest of the room dissolved into a gentle darkness. Close attention revealed a dim red glow, which didn't come from the kerosene lamp, but the heating charcoal on the ground. The cold air outside sculpted beautiful ice patterns on the window panes with the room's warm, humid air.
"You're afraid of the stars falling down?"
Ya asked softly. Fang laughed and shook her head.
"What's there to be afraid of? They're so tiny."
Ya did not give her the answer of an astrophysicist. She only said,
"They're very, very far away. They can't fall."
Fang was satisfied with this answer and went back to her needlework. But Ya could no longer be at peace. She put down her book and lay down on the warm surface of the Kong, closing her eyes. In her imagination, the rest of the universe around their tiny cottage disappeared, just the way the kerosene lamp hid most of the room in darkness. Then she substituted the universe in Fang's heart for the real one. The night sky was a black dome that was just large enough to cover the entirety of the world. The surface of the dome was inlaid with countless stars, shining with a crystalline silver light, none of which was bigger than the mirror on the old wooden table next to the bed. The world was flat and extended very far in each direction, but ultimately there was an edge where it met the sky. The flat surface was covered with mountain ranges like the Greater Kingon Mountains, and with forests dotted with tiny villages, just like Chi-Jiatun. This toy box-like universe comforted Ya, and gradually it shifted from her imagination into her dreams. In this tiny mountain hamlet, deep in the Greater Kingon Mountains, something finally thawed in Ya Winxia's heart. In the frozen tundra of her soul, a tiny, clear lake of meltwater appeared. Ya eventually returned to Red Coast Base with Yang Dong. Another 2 years passed, divided between anxiety and peace. Ya then received a notice. Both she and her father had been politically rehabilitated. Soon after, a letter arrived for her from Tsinghua, stating that she could return to teach right away. Accompanying the letter was a sum of money, the back pay owed to her father after his rehabilitation. Finally, at base meetings, her supervisors could call her comrade. Ya faced all these changes with equanimity, showing no sign of excitement or elation. She had no interest in the outside world, only wanting to stay at the quiet, out-of-the-way Red Coast base. But for the sake of young Dong's education, she finally left the base that she had once thought would be her home for the rest of her life and returned to her alma mater. Leaving the mountains, Ya felt spring was everywhere. The cold winter of the Cultural Revolution really was over, and everything was springing back to life. Even though the calamity had just ended, everything was in ruins, and countless men and women were licking their wounds. The dawn of a new life was already evident. Students with children of their own appeared on college campuses. Bookstores sold out of famous literary works. Technological innovation became the focus in factories, and scientific research now enjoyed a sacred halo. Science and technology were the only keys to opening the door to the future, and people approached science with the faith and sincerity of elementary school students. Though their efforts were naive, they were also down to earth. At the first National Conference on Science, Guo Muro, president of the Chinese Academy of Sciences, declared that it was the season of rebirth and renewal for China's battered science establishment. Was this the end of the madness? Were science and rationality really coming back? Ya asked herself these questions repeatedly. Ya never again received any communication from Tri-Solaris. She knew that she would have to wait at least 8 years to hear that world's response to her message, and after leaving the base, she no longer had any way of receiving extraterrestrial replies. It was such an important thing, and yet she had done it all by herself. This gave her a sense of unreality. As time passed, that sense grew ever stronger. What had happened resembled an illusion, a dream. Could the sun really amplify radio signals? Did she really use it as an antenna to send a message about human civilization into the universe? Did she really receive a message from the stars? Did that blood-hued morning, when she had betrayed the entire human race, really happen? And those murders? Ya tried to numb herself with work so as to forget the past, and almost succeeded. A strange kind of self-protective instinct caused her to stop recalling the past, to stop thinking about the communication she had once had with another civilization. Her life passed this way, day after day, in tranquility. After she had been back at Tsinghua for a while, Ya took Dong Dong to see her grandmother, Shaolin. After her husband's death, Xiao had soon recovered from her mental breakdown and found ways to survive in the tiny cracks of politics. Her attempts to chase the political winds and shout the right slogans finally paid off, and later, during the return to class, continue the revolution phase, she went back to teaching. But then Xiao did something that no one expected. She married a persecuted high-level cadre from the education ministry. At that time, the cadre still lived in a cowshed for reform through labor. This was part of Xiao's long-term plan. She knew that the chaos in society could not last long. The young rebels who were attacking everything in sight had no experience in managing a country. Sooner or later, the persecuted and sidelined old cadres would be back in power. Her gamble paid off. Even before the end of the Cultural Revolution, her husband was partially restored to his old position. After the third plenary session of the 11th CPC Central Committee, he was soon promoted to the level of a deputy minister. Based on this background, Shaolin also rose quickly as intellectuals became favored again. After becoming a member of the Chinese Academy of Sciences, she very wisely left her old school and was promoted to be the vice president of another famous university. Ya Wenxia saw this new version of her mother as the very model of an educated woman who knew how to take care of herself. There was not a hint of the persecution that she went through. She enthusiastically welcomed Ya and Dong Dong, inquired after Ya's life during those years with concern, exclaimed that Dong Dong was so cute and smart, and meticulously directed the cook in preparing Ya's favorite dishes. Everything was done with skill, practice, and the appropriate level of care. But Ya could clearly detect an invisible wall between her mother and herself. They carefully avoided sensitive topics and never mentioned Ye's father. After dinner, Shaolin and her husband accompanied Ye and Dongdong down to the street to say goodbye. Then Shaolin returned home, while the deputy minister asked to have a word with Ye. In a moment, the deputy minister's kind smile turned to frost, as though he had impatiently pulled off his mask.
"We're happy to have you and the child visit in the future, under one condition. Do not try to pursue old historical debts. Your mother bears no responsibility for your father's death. She was a victim as well. Your father clung to his own faith in a manner that was not healthy and walked all the way down a blind alley. He abandoned his responsibility to his family and caused you and your mother to suffer."
"You have no right to speak of my father,"
Ye said, anger suffusing her voice.
"This is between my mother and me. It has nothing to do with you."
"You're right,"
Shaolin's husband said coldly.
"I'm only passing on a message from your mother."
Ye looked up at the residential apartment building reserved for high-level cadres. Shaolin had lifted a corner of the curtain to peek down at them. Without a word, Ye bent down to pick up Dongdong and left. She never returned. Ye searched and searched for information about the 4 female Red Guards who had killed her father, and eventually managed to locate 3 of them. All 3 had been sent down to the countryside, and then returned, and all were unemployed. After Ye got their addresses, she wrote a brief letter to each of them, asking them to meet her at the exercise grounds where her father had died, just to talk. Ye had no desire for revenge. Back at Red Coast Base, on that morning of the transmission, she had gotten revenge against the entire human race, including those Red Guards. But she wanted to hear these murderers repent, wanted to see even a hint of the return of humanity. That afternoon after class, Ye waited for them on the exercise grounds. She didn't have much hope, and was almost certain that they wouldn't show up. But at the time of the appointment, the 3 old Red Guards came. Ye recognized them from a distance because they were all dressed in now rare green military uniforms. When they came closer, she realized that the uniforms were likely the same ones they had worn at that mass struggle session. The clothes had been laundered until their color had faded, and they had been conspicuously patched. Other than the uniforms, the 3 women in their 30s no longer resembled the 3 young Red Guards who had looked so valiant on that day. They had lost not only youth, but also something else. The first impression Ye had was that, though the 3 had once seemed to be carved out of the same mold, they now looked very different from each other. One had become very thin and small, and her uniform hung loose on her. Already showing her age, her back was bent, and her hair had a yellow tint. Another had become thick-framed, so that the uniform jacket she wore could not even be buttoned. Her hair was messy, and her face dark, as though the hardship of life had robbed her of any feminine refinement, leaving behind only numbness and rudeness. The 3rd woman still had hints of her youthful appearance, but one of her sleeves was now empty and hung loose as she walked. The 3 old Red Guards stood in front of Ye in a row, just like they had stood against Ye Zhetai, trying to recapture their long-forgotten dignity. But the demonic spiritual energy that had once propelled them was gone. The thin woman's face held a mouse-like expression. The thick-set woman's face showed only numbness. The one-armed woman gazed up at the sky.
"Did you think we wouldn't dare to show up?"
the thick-set woman asked, her tone trying to be provocative.
"I thought we should see each other. There should be some closure to the past,"
Ye said.
"The past is finished. You should know that."
The thin woman's voice was sharp, as though she was always frightened of something.
"I meant spiritual closure."
"Then you want to hear us repent?"
the thick woman asked.
"Don't you think you should?"
"Then who will repent to us?"
the one-armed woman asked. The thick-set woman said,
Of the 4 of us, 3 had signed the big character poster at the high school attached to Tsinghua. Revolutionary tours, the great rallies in Tiananmen, the Red Guard's civil wars, 1st Red Headquarters, 2nd Red Headquarters, 3rd Red Headquarters, Joint Action Committee, Western Pickets, Eastern Pickets, New Peking University Commune, Red Flag Combat Team, the East is Red. We went through every single milestone in the history of the Red Guards from birth to death.
The one-armed woman took over. During the 100-Day War at Tsinghua, 2 of us were with the Jinggang Mountain Corps, and the other 2 with the April 14th faction. I held a grenade and attacked a homemade tank from the Jinggang Mountain faction. My arm was crushed by the treads on the tank. My blood and muscle and bones were ground into the mud. I was only 15 years old.
Then we were sent to the wilderness.
The thick-set woman raised her arms.
2 of us were sent to Shaanxi, the other 2 to Henan, all to the most remote and poorest corners. When we first went, we were still idealistic, but that didn't last. After a day of laboring in the fields, we were so tired that we couldn't even wash our clothes. We lay in leaky straw huts and listened to wolves cry in the night, and gradually we woke from our dreams. We were stuck in those forgotten villages, and no one cared about us at all.
The one-armed woman stared at the ground numbly.
While we were down in the countryside, sometimes on a trail across the barren hill, I'd bump into another Red Guard comrade or an enemy. We'd look at each other. The same ragged clothes, the same dirt and cow shit covering us. We had nothing to say to each other.
The thick-set woman stared at Ya.
Tong Hong Jing was the girl who gave your father the fatal strike with her belt. She drowned in the Yellow River. There was a flood that carried off a few of the sheep kept by the production team, so the party secretary called to the sent-down students, "Revolutionary youths, it's time to test your mettle." And so, Hong Jing and 3 other students jumped into the river to save the sheep. It was early spring, and the surface of the river was still covered by a thin layer of ice. All 4 died, and no one knew if it was from drowning or freezing. When I saw their bodies, I can't fucking talk about this anymore.
She covered her eyes and sobbed. The thin woman sighed, tears in her eyes.
Then, later we returned to the city. But so what if we're back? We still have nothing. Rusticated youths who've returned don't lead very good lives. We can't even find the worst jobs. No job, no money, no future. We have nothing.
Ya had no words. The one-armed woman said,
"There was a movie called Maple recently. I don't know if you've seen it. At the end, an adult and a child stand in front of the grave of a Red Guard who had died during the faction civil wars. The child asks the adult, 'Are they heroes?' The adult says no. The child asks, 'Are they enemies?' And the adult again says no. The child asks, 'Then who are they?' The adult says, 'History.'"
Did you hear that?
The thick-set woman waved an arm excitedly at Ya.
History! History! It's a new age now. Who will remember us? Who will think of us, including you? Everyone will forget all this completely.
The 3 old Red Guards departed, leaving only Ya on the exercise grounds. More than a dozen years ago, on that rainy afternoon, she had stood alone here as well, gazing at her dead father. The old Red Guard's final remark echoed endlessly in her mind. The setting sun cast a long shadow from Ya's slender figure. The small sliver of hope for society that had emerged in her soul had evaporated like a drop of dew in the sun. Her tiny sense of doubt about her supreme act of betrayal had also disappeared without a trace. Ya finally had her unshakable ideal: to bring superior civilization from elsewhere in the universe into the human world.